That's it on Facebook. Should connect. It's now on Twitter. And
Facebook,
hopefully,
Twitter,
please go.
YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube as well. Good.
Okay, so is there any options that you can connect it on because you have Instagram and etc.?
Yeah, so that's. Because I use my Instagram for photography anyway, so. Anyway, thankfully that's everything pretty much sorted. I was having a wee bit of technical difficulties. I do apologise, only simply because of the fact that, well, it's more in relation to do with something I reinstalled when the operating system, shall I say. Because I don't even know if the comments will show up in this thing. If not, then I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to go straight ahead with things. So if anybody's got any comments, comment, and it should, well, on YouTube at least, that thing should show up. If not, it's not the end of the world. I do apologise if that is the case. Anyway, so obviously I've got, yeah, that's me, that's yourself, Mike. Good to see that you're right. So basically, our friend Mike, we're going to go through a number of things, topic issues in relation to do with China. I've had them on sometimes, a number of times before, shall I say. And I'll just quickly get up the notes. My thing's in the way, 2 seconds. Okay. So the first thing we're really going to speak about is something in relation to do with the third historical resolution of the CCP, which is the Chinese Communist Party. So this should be quite interesting. So in terms of the third historical resolution of the CCP, what would you have to say about that, Mike?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for getting me back to the YouTube channel. Because I mean it's a great honor. I'm always here to be here to talk about the situation of the current events. And of course, I also want to congratulate you to first time on Twitter have a live stream. I mean that means that you are now streaming across Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Yeah. This is an absolutely good way to engage more audience. No question about that. And so this is a huge plus. Anyway, back to the point of the third historical resolution of the CCP. Now that is the latest hot topic, isn't it? I mean, everybody, have anyone who's trying to talk about the Far East or even the whole PRC itself, they're trying to talk about this. Oh, this is a very important piece, which is true, by the way. I mean, they are absolutely spot on that it is vital for us to understand what is this about. Because at the end of the day, we have to understand, first of all, traditionally, the historical resolution, what is it about? Now, there have been only 3 historical resolution has ever, I mean, including the one, okay, make myself clear about, including the one that we just have ever published by the CCP or passed by the CCP, whatever you want to describe. And the first one was, resolution was passed in 1945. Now that one, what is it about? That was literally just after the World War II. And what happened is that basically it's established one, all the previous leaders of the CCP's doctrines are wrong. Tactics are wrong, directions are wrong. It's all wrong, okay? It's a very simple term. 2, there's only one person who gets it right. You guess it's who? Of course it's Mao. I mean, who will as well be? I mean, we know that Mao has a significant role after actually before 1940s already quite a huge role, a very influential leader within the CCP. And after 1945, he became the ultimate supreme leader of the CCP. So this is establishing when you talk about historical resolution of CCPs, they usually is about establishing a new direction of the party, and this is something that we have to bear in mind. And that's why it is.
Is this kind of because you say a sort of new resolution? So I take it with regards to Mao then. this new resolution at the time was the cultural revolution sort of thing?
Well, we will go to that about that because we have to talk about the history first because we have to
Yeah.
understand what it is about before we talk about. This is one of the reasons that I will highlight because these kind of things are not something that they issued in a light manner. So this is based on market change of direction. This is also a reflection of one thing that someone has become now a supreme leader. It's a proclamation basically to tell the whole world that look, I'm Mao. I'm not saying Mao I am, but basically at that point, Mao is now become the supreme leader. I'm now believing in the CCP has to have a change of the direction. That is the first historical resolution. Now, we're going to jump to the second historical resolution. Now, the second historical resolution is well, it depends on how you call it because it was introduced to the Central Committee in the 1980s, but it officially passed until 1981. So what is that about? That is basically about the change of direction again. First of all, the result it is Xiaobingtan after 1976 Mao has passed away, and of course Xiaobingtan successfully squeezed out the Guo Fenghua, the third handpicked successor of Mao, and the final one to get the power. I mean, bear in mind that there are two predecessors in that, but they never get into. They do one of them to get the power, but being squeezed out very quickly by Mao himself. And that's the one to get the power, and they squeeze out Guo Fenghua, and establish a doctrine. One, cultural revolution is wrong. That is very important. Xiaobingtan changed the direction. He believing that basically the so-called 70% and 30%, basically what is about what Mao is right and what Mao is wrong, okay, as a proportion. And the most importantly, two things. One, it marked the change of the open door policy. This is very important because they basically corrected the previous mistakes that they have, and that is exactly the whole thing that we want to highlight. And the final item that not many people actually notice is that Xiaobingtan is dead set against worshipping political leaders. That is very important, and not many people actually realize that because Xiaobingtan somehow basically he can use this as a way to worship himself, right? He didn't. It's very important. He's using actually one of the reasons that why he managed to squeeze Mao's the final handpicked successor out, because Guo Fenghua is trying to worshiping Mao, continue the policy because he's a Maoist fundamentally, and this is how his power base come from. But Xiaobingtan back then realized that this is not a route that you can go ahead. As a result, he also attacked about the worshiping political leaders. And of course, some people confuse the concept of the term limits. Term limits was not set on the historical resolution. He basically argued that he set a precedent himself that there should be a term limit rather than have a written. Of course, later will be written. By the way, I'm very clear about it, but it wasn't the key issue. Okay, so we have all understand all the historical context now. Of course, we don't ever forget that the second historical resolution is also Mark Xiaobingtan's proclamation himself. He is now the new generation of the supreme leader because he successfully marginalized a better term, the Maoists within the CCP. So he's now running open door policy. He condemned the cultural revolution and to mark the changes of the direction of the policy. And that is how things evolved. And so that's why people say, oh, the first historical resolution, when they say, okay, we have to take a look now because we have the precedent of the first one, the second one, right? So we would expect that is a clear change of direction, which is not surprising for many others, but I'm not surprised it is not the case. Now, on paper, it seems it is a very, very strong one. But the problem is that, one, we have to take a look at the content of the historical resolution. Now, the historical resolution is majorly, he's trying to define the CCP history in three parts. The first part is the Mao history. The second part is the Xiaobingtan and his real successor, Zhe Mingjiang, and Hu Jintao's tenure. And finally, it will be Xi Jinping's one. Now, that obviously, you can say, look, it is look like that it is Xi's comparing himself with Mao, isn't it? Because you see how they divide these things, right? But the funny thing is what? The funny thing is that, first of all, he only revealed the historical situation within his tenure. Now, this is a very important point to highlight. Secondly, in the previous two historical resolutions, we have seen the approach that you are going to criticize your predecessors, right? He's not brave enough to criticize his predecessors. That's very important. That means that he doesn't have the power grip or power base that he wished to have. Now, that is a hugely important thing, because usually these kind of things, we know that before he issued, it's already quite problematic. Why? Because, to be quite honest, you only do so when you have all the power on your hand. This is a proclamation that you now have everything, and that is how it is. But instead, he's still struggling in power struggle, okay? And then you would have thought that, well, this is basically mean the declaration of war. I mean, within all the other factual CCPs, because you are basically going for full-blown war in order to, like, well, in order to grip the power, right? Instead, he's not even brave enough to criticize his predecessor, which is a very important thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that shows that two things. One, he's either too weak to do so.
Yeah.
Or two, he's too afraid to do so. Now, either way is not a good situation for Xi, because let's face it, I mean, this is now a moment you want to have a coronation of your emperor, right?
Yeah, he needs respect, in other words.
Yes, and you still unable to do so. You see what I mean? He's not commanding the confidence that most people are hoping they have. Now, of course, if you are anti-CCP, then you may find this is not necessarily a bad thing after all, because that means that he's not having have a very firm grip of the situation. But this is the whole thing that I'm trying to reflecting on, and because most of the people does not even realize the situation over here, and that's why when they jump into gun and say that, oh, this is it, this is a permanent one, and this is not going to like change things or whatever it is. Instead, I want to highlight that it is not the case. In fact, he's trying to use this as a way to show his strength, but it kind of like backfire, because what happened is that it show his weakness here.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to disarm the strong resolution. You will have to do what? You absolutely want to show that you are now control of everything, but instead you're not controlling everything. So that is the whole point that I'm trying to bring out.
So this historical third resolution, in other words, what you're basically saying is the fact that first of all, he would have to try and gain respect, and this is something he's not really getting. The other thing is the fact that the main difference between that of Mao gained, well, okay, he gained the respect through a lot of fear and countless people lost their lives.
Whatever you want to call them, okay.
Yeah.
All the tactics.
Yeah, we know what happened in history there. And obviously, Xi, and through this sort of resolution, he would have to take total control over absolutely everything, but he's not really getting what you're saying. He's not really getting this respect in terms of him trying to carry through this third historical resolution, this change. Is that what you're...
Yes, it is. Exactly, because what we're trying to do, I'm not part of them. What he is trying to do is that he wants to build up the momentum to the coronation of his permanent leader position, a lifetime approach. But it is not gathering the momentum. Now, some people will say that this is a win for the NDC. I would not say so, because we have to remember that as far as he is still in the position, and he can always appoint someone that he can control. So I would say that this actually, it means that it's a deadlock at the moment. So it is a deadlock, it's a tie, so struggle carry on. But I'm not surprised by this result, because before because we just had the 6th planetary meeting of the 19th Congress, as of the 19th Central Meeting, Central Committees. Sorry, but their translation is very awkward. I got to read what exactly the English name is. Yes, the 6th planetary session of the 19th Central Committee of the CCP. Yes, it's an awkward thing. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just find it awkward. But then they they didn't do many things I was expected to do. For example, like they usually have the state-owned media, CCTV. Okay, will cover that. The propaganda channel. They're not allowed to cover that. You know, the People's Daily. You know, state-owned newspaper, not allowed to cover that. Why? I mean, it's kind of like that he's trying to control the rhetoric. You know, he's trying to like have a very controlled campaign. Then you know this is a tense moment because if you are confident, you are going to let all these people to film the delegates because you know that you are going to winning and you know your direction is in. So that's exactly the reason that why I pointed out, because it's just strange in my perspective that it is the case.
Yeah, I can obviously understand. So in overall, I mean, it does sound pretty much like the way things are going. I mean, a lot of people would perceive things like it's all doom and gloom, but it sounds at least somewhat more positive from what you're arguing there. At least from the perspective, like if he's not getting the same sort of respect. Of course, there's so much more to go into on that perspective in relation to that. So, 2 seconds, and I'll just dig up just cause there's things in the way.
Sure, no problem.
It's cause I've got the thing sitting up in front of me. I have to look at the bottom of this. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in terms of that's on the third historical resolution of the CCP. So in terms of the power struggle of the CCP, example with the sort of the disappearing of people and whatnot, what have you got to say on that? Because I do remember there was that one particular incident, and this was the guy that was equivalent to, like, you know, Amazon or whatever, where he's a massive businessman in China, and for a period of time he was even disappeared for a for a lengthy spell, and then he just somewhat reappeared. What have you got to say on the power struggle of the CCP and the example of to do with the disappearing of people and stuff like that?
Wow, that's a very easy approach, because I would say not easy. This is a reflection of power struggle. Now, first of all, we know that Jack Ma is just a proxy. I mean, it's very important that we have to remember that he is not holding everything that he claims he is. We believe that he is basically the whole Shanghai gang. Basically, all that is the people who are is invested on him. He's basically on behalf of them holding that. So when he disappeared, it means that the power struggle is trying to attack this purse. I mean, the vault of the Shanghai gang, because he has all the money, right? And but he has to come in out, and again, it's show one thing. That means that once again, she is not as having a very firm grip as most of people think of, because that means what? That means that you have to let someone who hold the money, not all, but a big part of the asset and wealth of your opponents to go. That means that you are in a troubling position. This is a reflection on that. And obviously, we can also talk about the latest incident of Shui Peng, or Peng Shui, because Peng is her surname. I mean, the tennis player, also, okay, Shui Peng. And you see the case that it was accused that she probably post on Weibo, that's equivalent to Chinese Twitter, to suggest that she was actually having an affair with the former first deputy prime minister, Go Li Jiang, and that is, and then later she disappeared, excuse me, and he also doesn't pop up on the public domain too. This incident actually just happened before the 6th plenary meeting, okay, saying this way, and it's once again, it's a tactic. It's a tactic of trying to attack your opponents, trying to claim the moral high ground, so-called, because they're trying to damage your opponents. They say, take a look at this guy is just only a morally inferior, shall we say, in this way, you know. So that is the problem, and that's why you shouldn't be trusting him. You know, take a look at. So that is this how things. But when this happened, actually, I'm a little bit puzzled, because one, Gao Lijiang is, yes, it is indeed, there's no question about that, he is part of the Shanghai gang. This is true though, okay? But the problem that we are having here is that he's a retired official. So what does that mean? You may say, Richard's a retired official. What does that mean? That means that the most effective way to attack someone that is in the office, not retired officials. Of course, we know that if you're a retired official, it's kind of like we call it German sausage cutting strategy. What does that mean? You cut it bit by bit to chuck it in. But the question is very simple. This is now the crunch point. Okay, this is the final moment that you want to push whatever you have, in the tank to finish your opponent. You still running these sausage cutting strategies? I'm not very sure what is going on, because you have to deliver the result by now. So that is the whole thing. And that's why I said that, it doesn't make any sense. And that's why I say I'm not surprised that this is the third, the third resolution. It's kind of like he's not even brave enough to attack his predecessors, because he clearly is not have a firm grasp, we are thinking. But of course, and now this incident of the tennis play incident is actually getting the situation worse, because now you have the World Tennis Association withdraw their presence, considering considering from the PRC, and then you have the Olympic Games president as concerning about the situation. I mean, when both of these men and women pop up again, it doesn't stop bleeding. So it's kind of like become a leverage for the NDC movement to say that, look, you have basically massively completely flagged it. The whole thing is just simply gone horribly wrong, and you have made one gigantic big hole that you will have to, get to go because you make a mistake. So of course they're using this kind of a classic tactics to do so, and that is what they are doing right now, because they're using Trump things trying to it was against them, but they successfully counter-attacked by another side, and that is what they are doing right now. And of course, we were going to talk about that the surprisingly bizarre death of the former Treasury Secretary, Ren Xinjing. And he was the Treasury Secretary of the PRC, during the time, I forget exactly years, but it was during the time during the financial crisis, the pre-financial crisis, 2007, 2008. And a few months ago, he was found dead in his accommodation. And what happened was that he was found dead. The reason is because he burned himself. What happened is that he doesn't burn himself. What happened was, it should be sperm, but they burn and choking, because he claimed, now the news claim, okay, that he was, because his wife just passed away recently, so he's trying to burn something out. This is one of the Chinese customs on the day. But it's just a bit bizarre, because there's no custom. Usually they're burning on the 7th day or the 15th of day, but I forgot what date it is, but it is not, the custom shouldn't take part on that place, And also the fire, size of the fire cover is very small. It doesn't make sense. So, what does that mean? Now, my theory is, now, I haven't got, you may say that, look, it's a small fire, but it's impossible. Okay, first of all, we have to remember that he is a cabinet level minister, okay, Secretary of State in UK terms, okay. If you retired under the PRC system, you have a good accommodation, okay. You're living in a gated community in American terms, okay. I'm going to borrow some of American terms here. You have maids, okay, so you have workers, you have butlers, not butlers, but maids working for you. You have high security working for you. Why, when there's a fire outside on the balcony, all these people is not realize that? You understand where I come from? Surely someone should have spotted that, right? You should not be able to not notice that, It is simply bizarre to believing that this is the case, because it shouldn't be the case, because that's why I said there's something fishy going on in my perspective. And what I'm believing in here is that probably what happened is that someone is trying to buy his life out. I mean, or he has been assassinated, or to be more clear about that. So you may ask, well, why? What is it related to about the power struggle then? Because it's very simple. Now, the power struggle is that because, remember, he was the guy who presided the 2007-2008, the three financial crisis approach financial crisis as a Treasury Secretary. We knew that actually the PRC bought a hell a lot of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac financial products like the bonds, okay, and also the prime mortgage items. Now, last stream we have already discussed this issue. You might probably recall about that, and we know, of course, this investment gone horribly wrong. My theory is that someone trying to ask the question: who was the decision maker that make that fateful decision in trying to, not trying, they do buy and buy all these assets. You know, if whoever that is the decisions made, then it should be the guy that will be named and shamed in the public. This is part of the power struggle because we knew that there is a problem of the power struggle, and what typically happened was that just to finish the point, I will let you point. Because we know that there's a two potential candidates to make this fateful decision. One, Long Ji-ju, former Prime Minister, the Tsar of the financial sector of the PRC. The Prime Minister between 1998 and 1997 and 1998 to 2003. Or Jabba, when the Prime Minister at that moment, from 2014 to 2023, it will be either one of them. And either one of them, what does that mean? You may say that these two guys are enemy of Xi.
That makes sense.
So you immediately know what is. Yes, they are trying to find the thirds of his opponents.
It's always the case. Because see when it comes down to it, right, and this is the thing, you'll always find that, you'll see it throughout recorded history, and it's even, I suppose you could throw in there with the whole thing with finding the scapegoat and everything. It doesn't matter whether you look at the Soviet Union or any other communist regime, just socialism in general. Anybody who basically opposes and is a threat to, you know, whoever is wishing to be leader. Just take, for example, you look at the Soviet Union, how there was competition for leadership, and how Stalin came to power was basically, you know, wiping out his competition. It happens all the time with socialism. It's always the case. And in terms of, you know, a communist like that of, you know, Xi, for example, he wouldn't like anything at all to do with anybody who poses a threat to, you know, himself in that sense, or even take for example the 2008 financial crisis. He wouldn't have liked that at all, or anything, because it gives, you know, socialism, it gives, you know, their country a bad name. So they have to try and find, you know, all the sort of scapegoat stuff. You know what I'm saying? And obviously whoever that particular guy is, although they say, you know, committed suicide, but you kind of get the point. It's probably been assassinated.
Well, straight away, not even commit suicide. He said that he's accidentally get choking and get burned. I mean, with all due respect, you have all these servants' quarters around. You have security. You're in a gay community. You have maids. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's fishy, you know. It's very, very simple thing. That's why I said that. You know that from these small things, you know this kind of tiny bits, and you know, like the power struggle is real, and that is exactly the reason I pointed out. And of course, we haven't talked about some more interesting things yet. The power struggle between each faction. For example, like, you know, last time I talked about the former president, Jeremy Zhang. He is probably on his deathbed, is dying. But surprisingly, a few months ago, you know, during the Mid-Autumn Festival, he wrote a note, a handwritten note, to basically saying that we want to, like, congratulate all the people, have a good Mid-Autumn Festival, you know, the usual stuff, right? But the funny thing is that he doesn't mention the word Xi. Now, usually, if you want to compliment Xi, you have say something like, "Oh, we have to congratulate and like congratulations everyone have a good Mid-Autumn Festival," and then saying that, "Oh, wow, I mean, we have to follow the great Xi leader's decision," blah blah blah, you know, usual stuff, right? You know, the usual stuff. I'm not going to repeat that. This kind of the worshipping, but it doesn't make sense, and he doesn't write it. That means that he's implying he's against that, and his writing is very strong. I mean, at least at that point. And what that means is that apparently he is still alive and well. He's trying to show this message. Okay, that is the key point. Okay. Now, however, I have seen the note. Now, I'm not a handwriting expert myself because I know that you can use auto pen to write stuff. Now, I know some of the people outside say, look, auto pen is for signature, right? Yes, but you can also replicate the things that he wrote in the past and at the same time to do so. And that is exactly the thing that they could happen. I'm not a handwriting expert. If someone is handwriting expert, they can easily distinguish between an auto pen or like a real one. So I'm not, but that is the thing. I do not know. But the whole point is, someone is clearly trying to use his note to gather momentum on the side or raise up the morale. But you may say that, look, it's just a note. Does it work? You know, you may ask, it's very simple. You know, it's just simply just a note, right? It does work. Now I give you a real example. When Mao is on his deathbed, remember what I say, Guo Fenghua, his handpicked successor and the final one to get the power. He famously, Mao, write a note to Hua to say that, I trust you to run the business. Okay? So that means that this is very important. So he immediately wants to take the note out and show all the people around, you know, the officials, the senior parliament, to say, look, Chairman Mao, trust me. You know, so all you don't have to listen to me. I mean, you know, this is the thing. Of course, this is only the half truth because he hides the second part of the note. If you have any problem, find my wife. Okay, that is called Qin Jiang. And of course, this is a thing, and we'll talk about her later. Well, but that is the thing. So you can see, of course, Deming Zhang is not having a command the same respect as Mao. There's no question about that. But you can see the way they're trying to do is trying to gather the momentum, trying to rally the troops, build up the morale to say, look, you know, our rebel chief is still there, still rebelling. You know, that is the point.
It requires that sort of togetherness, in other words, and this is the thing, because it's what, you know, they require for you know, such leadership. And if he hasn't got such respect, it sounds to me that the whole thing's all divided. See, it's like I said earlier on, in terms of Mao gained respect purely because, well, just look at how many people he killed. I think that should bloody well tell you. Right, there's a big difference, and the other thing that he's losing respect for is the fact that, okay, people disappeared, but then you've got ones that reappeared. You know what I'm saying in that sense?
Yep. And you're making the situation worse internationally.
Yeah, so it's like there's many things there that sound quite interesting. I know you were touching upon there, because there was obviously the thing on the Chinese writing style to criticise the leader. Obviously you touched upon the sort of thing in relation to do with the writing.
Yes, and because you criticize a leader, you usually do not use a direct criticism, because this is a traditional approach of writing. There are two ways you do. You usually use implications, and another one you will try to do is to use a past to imply the present, but basically use an implication approach. Now, the first approach we're going to do is to basically, I recall a few months ago, I mean, the daughter of the former vice president, Qin Hongzheng, I mean, who himself was a lieutenant of Deming Zhang and the second in command of the Shanghai gang. Okay, she after her company lose like the share price plummet, like losing hundreds of millions. I mean, Hong Kong dollars, which are around dozens of millions of pounds. I mean, a day. She issued a picture on Weibo to say, that's Chinese Twitter, to say, it is darkest hour. That darkest hour picture was the movie from, recall the Churchill movie, you might recall a few years ago, Darkest Hour, right? Now, you may say, look, what does that mean? I mean, is that because her company lose a hell of a lot of money, so it's darkest hour? Of course not. We know that all of them are corrupted. But by the way, I would love to have that lose the money that gave it to me. I mean, you and I would be very happy to enjoy that. I mean, we can all agree that, dozens of millions. I mean, but they are much more wealthier than that. This is not really that a big deal. Of course, it's a lot of money, but it's not the end of the world. There's no question about that. But it's absolutely not the darkest hour. Come on. What does that mean? We know that internationally, the international community start to referring Xi as Hitler. Darkest hour is about Churchill against Hitler.
Yeah.
When she said darkest hour and put the picture of the movie on, that means that she is against Xi. Now this is this kind of hidden message getting across, and this is the whole thing. For example, you take a look at the current vice president of the CCP. That is the I'll suddenly forget his name. That is suddenly forget his name. That is the problem. When you're trying to remember too many names at the same time, then you always have a problem. Yes, Qi San Huang, yes, who is very well connected with Wall Street, and his spin doctor suddenly posts not suddenly, but another day ago, okay, to post another on Weibo, again Chinese Twitter, to say what, even at the first time I talk about how to cook pickettes, and he said that in the past, we believe that cook pickettes, even though it's bad, but it's cooking good and it's also good, and then he talked about a bunch of picket stuff, and then at the end of the day, at the end of the essay, okay, not very long, it's Twitter, and he write down the Chinese version of Twitter. There's 0 word limit, and you're right at the end. He changed the form card to say that if the picket is bad, if we cook that, it will still be good. It change of color. Well, that means change of color, change of direction. That means a change of things. That is another way. Now, you may say that another approach, for example, in the PRA newspaper, I mean the People's Liberation Army, they have their own newspapers, okay, not everybody should notice that. Another day they say, publish an article, they said that the military leads someone that can see the enemy. Now, what does that mean? I mean, you do not talk about that. Why? You only talk about that if let me organize my thoughts. You do not talk about this if your leader can see the enemy. You're basically implying that your leader is not going to see your enemy. It's in a bunch of implications. You see what I'm talking about. And not to mention about that, in another day, the PRA's newspaper talk about to prevent someone will come back to have a restoration, just like the Truman crisis. Now, Truman crisis is a historical event that takes place in the early 15th century in the Ming Dynasty of China. Okay, what happened is that in the 1435, actually back then to one of the emperor, Yingzhong of the Ming Dynasty, he basically encouraged by an eunuch, to go to have a war with Mongolia. Now, he declared the war and he commanded troops in the front line, and he was captured. Okay, so he was captured, and then back to the minister in Peking, they said that, look, we cannot allow them, capture the king or capture the emperor, and that's it, we can't allow them to blackmail us. So immediately the minister to rally together to say that we got to get one of the emperor's brother to ascend to the throne. So we cannot be blackmailed, someone can make a decision, okay? Now, after that, because the Mongols say, oh, they have a new emperor, so that old emperor is useless now, so we cannot get our stuff, we'll get it back to Ming China. And after that, he was treated as a retired emperor. On paper, it is like having all these kind of things, but in practice, actually he's subject to house arrest. So he's very unhappy, the retired emperor, when his brother, Jing Di, is having a huge sick and is almost dying. Well, the retired emperor immediately takes out a coup and to get back to power. Now, why you talk about this story? You imply that someone is trying to restore, someone coming back to try to get it in. And that is exactly the situation which we see, because in other words, the military is seeing that there could be a restoration of previous leaders or regimes. So that is a very important thing, because that is, in other words, they're disagreeing with the current regime or regime or administration or government, whatever you want to call them. You see what I'm talking about? That is how we're going to see how they use the past and talk about the present. And this is exactly what they're doing. Obviously, you have seen the Xi side, they talk about something else to their opponents. For example, Xi have one day, I forgot, it is come I believe it's some non-military newspaper, I forgot which newspaper. They talk about that in CCP there is no iron cap prince. I'm trying to think about how to translate the term. Well, what is iron cap prince? What does that mean? It's a Qing dynasty term. It's a type of nobles. Because in Qing dynasty, if you get a peerage or nobility, every several generations, I forgot how many, 2 or 3 generations later, your nobility would downgrade automatically for one level, and then until the end you have nothing. Okay, that is the whole point. Okay, but however, there's one type of nobility you will never be downgraded. That's exactly the one we call the iron cap prince. This is only I believe not more than half a dozen of them. I mean, they are the peerage that would never be downgraded. Okay, that is the point. Okay, now one may say what that means. Okay, now that means that someone have a privilege in CCP, in other words, implying that the CCP will eliminate everyone that he's against, that she's against, even though no matter what type of privilege that they have in the past. So that is the whole point. Now, so that's why you see that how they're implying things and how they talk about stuff. So now you understand how they're covering these kind of things. And this is exactly the point I want to highlight, because people not necessarily realize what it is. But just you may think about, okay, so why they have to like running this kind of implication games? You know, just like playing riddles, isn't it? You know. First of all, it is a custom or this is approach, a historical context running about this kind of things, because you cannot simply directly point out to your leader. That is the approach, indirect approach. It's very highly contextualized. That's why Chinese is one of the most contextualized language in the world, other than another one with Japanese and Koreans and Arabic, correctly.
Yeah.
And secondly, they have to do. But secondly, they have to do so is because they do not have other way to communicate, especially the anti-Xi movement. Why? Because we all know that the CCP has a very good surveillance system to surveillance people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It also happened on their own party senior executives. They cannot go back to the back then in 1976 after Mao dead, the famously known the Huairen Tang incident or Ryan Hall incident. Tang is mean hall in Chinese, okay? To basically secretly gather together and a private discussion to say how we're going to eliminate the Gang of Four, a Maoist fringe group, led by Mao's wife, Jin Jiang, okay? And to say that, okay, we're going to do this, do that, we'll secretly do that, a few bombs in, bombs out. Okay, done. We're going to 1, 2, 3, we're going to arrest them. You can't have things like that these days. You're not afford. When you gather, she is have the incumbent advantage because he can see this data. You understand where I come from? Mm-hmm. So he know, okay, when they gather, okay, they must be doing something against it. I mean, let's face it, you are the guy who is missing, okay? I always say to my friends that, she is not a fan of liberty, but he's not stupid, okay? Yeah. There's a reason that why he climbed to the top of the greasy rope. I mean, so he knows the situation very well. And that's exactly what he is trying to do, because he is trying to talk those kind of things. So that's why they have to communicate in a very indirect approach. But you may say, so what? I mean, even though you are arrested, it's nothing, right? You just lose all these kind of things. No. What happened fundamentally changes the game is that she opened a trapdoor for him and for others, accidentally, in my perspective. Why? Because a few years ago, not quite long, almost 10 years ago, what happened was that one of the standard member of political coup, nicknamed the Tsar of Law Enforcement, that's Yong Hangzhou, okay, he was arrested because he attempted to kickstart a military coup. Because he tried to use the law enforcement to start a military coup. But luckily, back then, President Hu almost soon to be stepped down, received a tip, so he mobilized the military to neutralize the crew, shall we say. Of course, no one report that. They always maintain that CCP is a very peaceful, harmony party that no one will dispute things. Of course, they will never report them. But if you ask those who live in Peking, they definitely can listen to the sound of the military fight on that day and night. So that is the thing. But anyway, now we get to the point. Because he attempted military coup, now it failed. Now the rule set up by Xiaoping Tang, the ground zero, was that no matter how big the mistake that it was, once you become a standard member of the political coup, you will only, if you lose a political fight, you will not be named and shamed and taken to the prison and expelled from the party. So you can be stuck at home, okay? Maximum house arrest, like Zhi Yangzhao after he supported the Tiananmen Square students in the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, former general secretary, and then he's been house arrest, but he still never be expelled. He still have the good accommodation, healthcare, the usual welfare packages, sometimes retirement packages that where I come from, okay? But what happened was that in the case of Yong Hangzhou, he was subjected to scrubbing all these kind of things. That break the ground zero. This is a very important point because that means one thing. For the NDC people, they knew that if they do not go bold, they will go broke like Yong Hangzhou because they will be subject to the same treatment because it's very easy to be accused corrupt, and by the way, they both are corrupt anyway. So they can be very easy to be pushing on this kind of things, And they know that they must fight. And Xi knows that too, because he knows that because he has accepted a new ground zero now. So that he has to keep on fighting. So it escalates the situation to extremely aggressive for both sides. And both sides not fight to the end, but the very end. That's why they will use all the tactics that they have.
I see what you mean.
And that's the unintended consequence. I believe in unintended consequences that he broke the ground zero, and no one can repair it now. Because no one can have the respect like Mao or Tang. Can stop Soke say, look, we'll back to the Xiaoping Tang's ground zero. No, I don't see someone can have to command the same respect can do it.
So
that is the crisis that we have.
In terms of what you had, explained there, would that then? And obviously I had a comment earlier on in King Stuart event had basically stated that when the Nazis get in, the first thing they did was get rid of the other socialists, exactly. But I suppose what you had explained there would all correlate to, I'll just drag it up. It's minimised. Would that then correlate to the something to do with a failed assassination attempt on Xi? Because of
course, no. You go ahead first.
So basically, all of it case I can hear from what you're saying is all to do with division, the lack of respect, and everything else, and obviously. I was just wondering if that had anything in relation to do with any failed assassination attempt, because that's obviously the next thing you were going to speak about.
Oh, of course, no question about that. Well, we knew that Nazi Party, even though I believing that at one day Hitler himself even purged his own party, if I understand correctly. I forgot he even one time purged one of the how you call them? I suddenly forgot the name. SS, one of the top SS people back then, top of the SS. Because that's the problem when you read too much and so many names got stuck on. Suddenly forget the name come out. That's the problem. But I believe one of the top SS chiefs was purged in the 1930s because same thing. And I absolutely agree on you on that. And speaking about it, of course, there's no question about it. We know that on record, there are at least 3 failed assassination to a Xi in the last year, to say at least. It's quite lucky to receive a tip-off. What happened was that they have been attributed to the falling star of law enforcement, Yong Hangzhou's ally. Now they claim they're trying to get revenge, and of course, later these are failed assassins and been blamed on the mishandling of Hong Kong policy. This is very simple. I mean, she definitely feel the heat. I mean, otherwise, he would not find trying to find scapegoats. He is clearly trying to desperately try and find some scapegoat here.
You mean she's trying to find the scapegoat?
Yes, she's trying to scapegoat. Now, because she, for example, like you may recall that a few years ago, one of the bookstores in Hong Kong, when the staff sent books to some area, he was basically forcefully removed back to mainland China, who was to mainland China. You may recall a few years ago. And now she blamed that he actually doesn't authorize that. It was the failed assassin that conduct this kind of event without his knowledge. She's definitely trying to find an scapegoat here. You understand what I'm talking about, okay?
Yeah.
So this is exactly what he's trying to do, of course. He is very concerned because not many people actually notice that he is trying to use the law enforcement because he understands the importance of the control is to maintain of the whole party and all the people. He has to have a firm grip on the law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
Now you may say, look, military is good, isn't it? Now the military is good as is not really that 100% because now in the communist system, the left hand doesn't trust the right hand, So the military doesn't have the weapons, and the weapons and the ammunition are stored in a complete separate. So if you want to mobilize them, it can take a bit of time, okay? So law enforcement is the most direct one. You have all the weapons on your hand, ammunition on your hand, everything done on one people. The problem is that he never know how many of the chiefs of the law enforcement are actually the former Tsar of law enforcement's ally. That is a big question mark. Now, you may say, look, he can purge everyone out. I mean, that's the most easy, straightforward solution, isn't it? But the problem is that if he purge everyone now, and you eliminate everyone now, he will immediately have a power vacuum. This will create two things. One, you will lose the grip. I mean, let's face it, you don't have enough people to manage the whole surveillance and the controlling people system. Now, of course, it will collapse. Two, there won't be enough people to fill the vacuum immediately, and this could be very problematic in the future. A very good reminder that, we all remember Red Terror during Stalin in the 1920s and the 30s. This is one of the problems. He purged all this junior to middle level management staff of the military. But actually, one of the reasons that why the Soviet Union, when they faced Nazi Germany, it was almost like a complete meltdown. Of course, we know that Stalin refused to trust the intelligence, to suggest that actually the Nazis are building up and attacking the Soviet Union. But that is a huge part. But of course, another part is that they don't have enough experience to deal with all these people. And that is a very major part. The last one that she wants to do is that if he have a massive purge and people are losing the grip and to do whatever that it is, or do not have any room to control it. That is the absolute nightmare of Xi. That is the point. But the problem is that if you don't purge him, purge the whole system.
Yeah.
You never know who is going to pop up to attack you. Where this will come from. That's why she is in a big dilemma at the moment. To purge or not to purge.
Yeah.
Not to be intended to be a Shakespeare, okay, here. But the point is that he got stuck. He is unable to do the things that he wants to do. And he do not even know who he can trust. And that is a huge nightmare of Xi. And he cannot afford to back down, by the way, because I just tell you about the ground zero is broken. And that is the whole situation.
Yeah, so it's like, I can see obviously that it's a case that if he was to go down that road, and I can understand that obviously that would create a problem in and of itself, because he has to have unity. I think it's
what?
what?
You go ahead first.
Yeah, I mean, what option would they have anyway? It's a case that he's already got division enough as it is. And would he have enough numbers? Well, he would have to try and strike fear into people. He would have to do exactly what Mao Zedong did. That's really the only. That's the thing with, and it's something that socialists don't understand, because socialists have got a very very hard time understanding human nature or being self-interested. That you can't just create unity, like as if you just, get rid of something and then people just magically come together. It doesn't work like that, and this is why you're seeing division now. And even if he was to go down that road, like you're saying, even if he was to go down the road of purging and purge the entire system and, as you know, killing people and whatnot, if he was to go down the road of purging everything, even then he'll probably still have division.
Of course, and the most important, purging is not as best interest, because, of course, the problem is that we have seen purging's result in Soviet Union
Yes.
and in PRC.
Yes.
Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap and before the and all these kind of things is a kind of a purging, but it's not a. But it is in a more ugly way of purging. But they never use the word purging in terms. But the question is that it never works, and so do in Cambodia. We've seen a huge gigantic amount of purging. It doesn't work. You are very right, because people, you can only have one objective in one thing, that is during the war. Let me organize my thoughts. The reason that why during war that can be so easy to operate is because there is one thing, that is win the war. This is also questionable, especially by Ronald Coase. If we have time or in the future, we'll talk about Ronald Coase later. But the question is that after even though it's a peaceful time, you always have different objectives. You can never purge the whole system unless you can do everything yourself, which we can't. Let's face it. So that is exactly the issue that we are having right now. And she cannot trust anyone. She's struggling to trust anyone. That's why you take a look. All the official titles, for example, in the past, the Prime Minister has been transferred to the President. That is himself. So that's why we say that Ke Chang-li is the most powerless or useless. I'm not useless. When I say useless, I'm not saying that he's an individual as a useless guy, okay? When I say useless, I mean as a position as Prime Minister. He is the one who has the least power ever in the modern Chinese, modern PRC system, because all the power be transferred to the president. Because in the past, we say that before Xi, during Hu Jintao's era, it's about what we call collective presidential system. What that we described it is basically you have 9 or 7 political group, ascendant political members. Each one of them will be in charge of one area. For example, like President Hu will be in charge of the diplomatic or foreign relations. Then he will be czar of that area. He will absolutely authority over the area. Okay, like Prime Minister Jia when he is in charge of economy, so he will have a whole say of the whole situation. You have the czar law of enforcement. I just said, I do not repeat myself. So that is the thing. Now we say that all the political members' powers are almost basically considered on the president himself. So that is the thing. By the way, before we move to the next topic, I want to take the opportunity to clarify one thing about the misconception of Hu Linghuang, one of the standard member of the coup. There is a common theme that to suggest that that Hu Linghuang is the the mentor of the presidents. Basically saying that they're the free mentor of all the previous presidents is the mentoring by him because he's political theorist or whatever that it is. Okay, so that is what they claim it is. Now I have to correct that this is not true. Hu Linghuang is the best way to describe is a propaganda master. Because we know that because these people are usually studying science subjects. For example, like Yu Mingzhang, he's an engineer. Jin Daogu, another engineer. Xi himself, although he has a PhD, I believe, in law or something like social science, I forget what degree it is, but his first degree actually is a chemistry, or biochemistry, something like that, okay? All of them are a bunch of scientists. Of course, some people will argue that actually she is not really that scientist really, because he's questionable whether he can get to university in the first place. But anyway, they need someone to help them to package the stuff, because they have the ideas, but they're not very good like organizing them philosophically. You understand where I come from? So they need a spin doctor. So Hu Wang Maximum is a spin doctor. If she is Hitler, then Hu Wang is a Joseph Goebbels. So this is a better approach. So he is not the mentor of the presidents, okay? I have to clarify here, because there is a common misunderstanding here. And that is the point I add.
Yep. So basically, in terms of Xi's insecurity and his reluctance to travel abroad, what is it you would say on that in particular?
Well, first of all, we talk about all the law enforcement insecurity that he is suffering at the moment. So you can know how insecure it is. But the most importantly, you may say, look, just a law enforcement, he still has the back of the military, right? You would have think so, except it didn't. For example, the Peking garrison. I mean, this is a place that is the capital of PRC, okay? The commander of the Peking garrison has changed multiple times now since he became the president. I mean, and it's abnormally frequent, and some of the rank has been purged. Now, this shows one thing. He doesn't trust the military. He can't find anyone he can trust. I mean, let's face it. If you can find someone that you can trust, you're not going to purge the rank, okay? This is a show that actually he doesn't trust the military, so he doesn't have a back of military. Next, the 61889 regiment, basically the Central Guard regiments. The commander and the ranks has been purged, once again multiple times. I mean, this is again the same thing. This is a place that is protecting the Zhongnanhai, equivalent to the White House of Washington. Okay, this is a compound for the senior party officials to live and work in. This is not people that you want to change daily. This is something that you want someone to watch your back here, you know. Because, as I just said, for example, the former law enforcement Tsar attempted to get the military coup out. You want the Peking garrison people to be any moment receive a tip to report it to you and to neutralize this. This is not people position that you want to change regularly. He doesn't have the back of the military. And most importantly, this also shows one thing. She probably doesn't have the military intelligence control. Because we have to understand that in the past, okay, I haven't said in the past, the military intelligence was mainly controlled by Major General Jinning Ip. He himself is also as the part of the Crown Prince faction, which she used to be in. Major General Ip was considered as the so-called honorable figurehead of the so-called Crown Prince faction, because because of his leadership, and as well at the same time he has respect from his father too, because his father, Field Marshal Jin Ip, from Canton, I mean just the province next to Hong Kong, can speak Cantonese by the way. Basically, he's one of the 10 only field marshals that ever given the PRC, and he is also a key ally of Xiaoping when it comes to stop the Cultural Revolution, it marginalized the martyrs in the party, and also follow Xi's advice in standing down instead of becoming a lifetime leader of the party. So that is the thing. So after Major General it passed away in the, I believe it's 2016, something like that. We don't know who controls the military intelligence now. But it's definitely not Xi. If it's Xi, he will approach the ranks. It's very simple. He can't find someone he can trust. So that's why it's explaining a huge amount of insecurity, because you can see that he's like a loose head chicken. Is how you call him in English?
Yeah, pretty much. Someone that's someone that's like a headless chicken is basically someone who's completely lost.
Yes, it's a headless chicken. Yes, thank you very much, Bob. Sorry, I try my best to improve my English. You know, it's like headless chicken here. He doesn't have a clue who he can trust. That's huge and significant, and that is the key moment, because that's why you see that previously I talked about in the last stream, the SCMP. You take about that they refer an article to talk about that. Briefly, probably should refer an article to talk about that the military refused to endorse the foreign ministry's decision, right? They're serious, That's what explain all these kind of things. And we have also seen that, the discrepancy of the PRA newspapers when they're coming to talk about this kind of stuff and about what she's trying to do. The bizarre thing is that we're here to see the PRA is more peaceful than the civilian officials in the foreign office of the PRA always talk about the war wolf strategies. This is laughable now. It is bizarre. I mean, usually the military is more aggressive than the civilian officials, right? The diplomats, right? They're exactly the reverse. It's unbelievable. And obviously, she's also very concerned that when he leaves the country, he will be coup. I mean, we all remember in 2006, the Thai Prime Minister, former Thai Prime Minister, Thaksin Shinawatra, when he flew in a UN summit. What happened? The military coup took place back in Thailand. He is very afraid that. And of course, we haven't talked about that other things, such as the fact that he could be assassinated on the plane. I mean, for example, now you may say that, look, it is an Air Force One. You may say that, why could be assassinated? You should have a lot of equipment, right? No. Now, first of all, we have to remember that actually the president of the PRC, or the supreme leader, whatever they call them, they do not have an Air Force, designated Air Force One, because they did consider to buy one of the Boeing planes back in the late 1990s. But later it was discovered that one of these planes was being bugged. So they say that they will not buy it anymore. So instead what they do, they will charter an Air China 747, now in the past 747-400, now 747-8, one of the free state-owned airline companies, at the point randomly as the presidential jet, or executive jet, shall we say it this way. So he actually is flying on a civilian planes, and he can only be protected within the by military within this country, So that is the thing, because I mean, well, I'm not going to say anything further, but there are a lot of things could happen. For example, like we know how Lockerbie happened. I'm sure that you as a Scot, you know what Lockerbie is. The Lockerbie air crash, the terrorist attack. Just happened in Scotland, in Lockerbie.
Yeah, I've heard about because it's been mentioned numerous times before, and I think
I'm not going to go.
I think the terrorist attack, the it was the SNP or something like that, sympathised or something. I can remember seeing something. It was a while back.
Well, but you know what I mean when I talk about Lockerbie and talk about that. Well, I mean, she was very afraid that he will become the next victim, so that's why he never fly out.
Yeah, he doesn't. He doesn't trust. He doesn't trust. He's faced with a sort of, well, it's a kind of catch-22. He's kind of faced with the situation. You look, for example, Taiwan. You look at for how he would want to take back over, Taiwan and stuff like that, and that would be his incentive. But then at the same time, he's faced with the sort of dilemma that, like you say, his own country, the military, could end up taking over if he was to leave, because there is that division of what you're basically saying. At the same time, you could end up in a situation where, could be assassinated.
Sure, and that is the whole thing.
Because he doesn't have the support.
Not many people actually notice that, and that's why I highlight them. Obviously, if he even go to Taiwan, there's no guarantee that the military will going to listen to him. I mean, that is a very, very important thing that I want to highlight. I mean,
Taiwan wouldn't be in support.
Well, no, I mean the military not necessarily agreeing on the military takeover. I mean, for example, the military can refuse to listen to the command of the of the president. You understand where I come from?
Yeah.
Of course, Taiwan would not be happy with that. Taiwan would not listen to that. Taiwan would not be doing whatever that it is. So that is the thing, and that is why the whole situation is still going ahead. And that is the reason that why I say that we have to be very careful to see what they're doing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'd spoken about that before, and especially when they're testing, not testing, but the best way to put it is they were, how do I put it, trying to strike fear with flying planes round about that.
Oh yes, they're trying to fly over the Taiwan multiple times, but yes, they could. But in my perspective, the louder they talk about, the less likely it is, because the only way that they can win the war is a blitz. It's just like how Germany blitzed Poland. They cannot be afforded to be too loud. That is my point. The louder they are, the more that is likely to be like sort of gestures. That is my view.
Yeah.
And of course, we haven't even talked about the other issues as well. For example, like I recall there was a PRA journal actually written an essay like more than 15 years ago to analyze if there is a war, if the PRC wish to mobilize to take over Taiwan, military take over Taiwan. In that general's perspective, it would be extremely difficult. Because they basically analyze that you don't have many landings, and then how they can react, all this kind of. Because he's basically playing the war game over there and running a module. And his conclusion is that as a PRA general, he concluded that if the PRC decide to attack the ROC, it's fair and wise.
Yep.
It is his perspective. In his perspective, of course, the articles need some updates, but for sure it shows the problem that they are going to face.
Yep. So the next thing that obviously on here is the fake identity of Hong Kongers, the crash between the British Hong Kong Chinese and the others, the other Chinese group, and the UK taking back control over Hong Kong. The obstacles and the charter cities sort of situation we're going to be talking about. So what do you make of the? Because obviously it's something you're going to speak about, something to do with the fake identity of the Hong Kongers and the crash between the British Hong Kong Chinese and stuff like that.
Now, first of all, the reason I use the word fake identity is because there's nothing called Hong Kongers, Hong Kong people, or Hong Kong, whatever you want to call them. Now, I always ask the question, what is the definition of Hong Kong people or Hong Konger? No, what is your view of that? Now, I'm asking you.
My perspective.
What would be your definition of Hong Kong people?
From my perspective, it would be someone who actually does have, would have had a sort of passport, would have been born in Hong Kong, not someone, how do you put it, not someone who might be a sort of Chinese spy, not someone
Let you go ahead first.
So someone who was genuinely born in Hong Kong. I know you do get the sort of Chinese spies who might, pretend to be of, Hong Kong citizenship and live among the people. And I don't know how true it is or not.
No, because I'm trying to lead this. It was a leading question that I asked you to hear, because now the reason I asked this question is because, in other words, you basically say that whoever have the permanent residency, this is in Hong Kong, then should be Hong Kong people, right? In a very simple, broad terms.
Yeah.
That is the flaw of the concept. Why? That means a British, an Italian, and an American can be a Hong Kong person, Hong Kong people, Hong Kongese, what you have to call them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a fake identity. It's an identity without nationality. This identity originally the invention is in the late 1960s. It's trying to blend all the people together. Because you have all the people who come from mainland China, whatever that is, different provinces, they're trying to blend all the people together. The problem is that this is a way later in the 1980s, used as a way for the British government to dodge responsibility of the British Chinese in Hong Kong. Because once they can blend into claim as a Hong Konger, then they say that, look, they're Hong Kong people, they're not British. You understand where I come from?
Yeah, at one point, because
yes,
I can see your argument there
yes,
and your reasoning, because yeah, people might look at it in two ways, and from that perspective, yeah, I mean, at one point, it was actually a Scotsman, like we touched upon before, with Cowperthwaite, who had founded what would become, the main city, Hong Kong. And yes, it was largely occupied by Britain at one point. So I can understand where you're coming from in that respect. And like you mentioned before, in the British, I think, is it the British national passport?
yes, BNOs, British
Yeah.
National Overseas,
Aye, that's it.
and yes, British National Overseas, the BNOs, and this is one of the nationalities. You see the British government still insists on the passport holders. That's why they're so afraid to insist on Britishness. Why? Because they know that if you tell the public that they are British, then you explain them why you abandoned them in the first place.
Yeah, here's the thing,
That's
because
why they use.
I mean,
Go ahead first.
I agree with what you're saying. I mean, the thing that the British government will be living in fear over is purely because of the relationship with China. They'll be the British government will be thinking to themselves, if we intervene, well, how's China going to react? What's the implications? Could in other words, there's the possibility that war could ensue from such a thing. You know what I mean? And looking at because I know you mentioned before, and it isn't really that simple. But people might think to themselves, well, Russia's on the side with China, and it could end up creating, such division if Britain was to get, to intervene. And I think that's where the main fear comes from in terms of the British government.
Which is wrong, proven to be.
Yeah, I can understand
yes,
what you're
because
saying.
what happened was that you create a monster over there, and not to mention about the Soviet Union actually collapsed faster than we expected. So it is like an absolutely disaster. You create a monster. That's why we're dealing with the CCP. We have no clue how we're going to do. Not no clue, but we're carefully destroying it to create a self-destruction of CCP. But the question is that it's become an absolute monster because of Hong Kong policy. It's a failed one. So that is the point. That's why it is a fake identity. Now, I know there are some people trying to argue that actually in the 1970s it is successfully blended in. I would just ask them of one simple thing. Of course, after the pandemic, okay, you go to the cemetery of Hong Kong. I'm not saying the cemetery of Hong Kong there's a place for the cemetery of Hong Kong. I mean all the cemeteries in Hong Kong, okay?
Yeah.
Go and take a look. You hardly find any gravestones going to write on that they are from Hong Kong. That is the best proof to say that these people do not believe in that they are Hong Kong people, Hong Kongese. That is a fake identity. And when you see some of these people who are trying to argue that it is, they are either have a political interest to maintain that, or they are, we might dare to say, control the oppositions. By either part of the CCP or other the British government. It depends on the situation. We can talk about case by case because I actually have gathered a quite long list of potential opposition candidates. We'll talk about it if we have more time. But that is the thing what I'm saying. This is a fake identity. An identity without nationality. And today, you see that they still the British government trying to insist as passport holders. But my question to them is very simple. Passport is a byproduct of the nationality. It is simply absurd to say that we're not British.
Yeah.
I always tell them, if you want to say us not British, fine. Scrap of this category of nationality. The simple, straightforward solution is scrap this category of nationality. But you can't because the promise is a lifetime guarantee. Obviously, they could try to kill all of us.
Look at, for example,
well, doesn't mean that
yeah.
I'm not, at one point I'm going to finish it.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that you kill all of us, okay? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that for the sake of theoretical exploration. I'm not saying that this is the case and we should be, by the way. I'll make something clear about that. Back to you.
Yeah, look at, for example, I mean, what contradicts people who try to disagree. Look at, for example, the likes of the Falkland Islands. We consider them British, and they are. Britain, occupies, and the people, agree being, part of Britain. And the Falkland Islands is, far away from this land here. It's the same. I would, in my opinion, it's the same argument. You would never disagree with the fact that those people who were born and raised in the Falkland Islands are British, and for me it's the same principle, in my view, and it's actually the very reason why I was glad to see Britain eventually taking action, at least to some extent, and giving people from Hong Kong the ability to come here to Britain. And it's like I've said before, I mean, there's a very, very, very big difference between people of Hong Kong to that of the type of people from perhaps some socialist country that doesn't understand, that doesn't have the same work ethic, etc. Whereas the people of Hong Kong have lived and they've experienced the free market and stuff like that. They understand what it means. They would greatly, coming here, they would greatly benefit the UK economy and whatnot. And I was glad to see that taking place, which of course we will in a second speak about. That in relation to do with the charter cities again. However, mentioning there, you had mentioned something to do with the crash between the British Hong Kong Chinese and the other Chinese group.
Which I was going to take over here now.
Yeah,
if you want to, perhaps.
So what is it you've got to say in that?
Yes, I will come into it, but before that, I just want to make a point clear that I want to remind everyone that before the joint declaration was signed, 70% of the population supported British rule. Okay, 25% of them supported a UN territory status. Okay, only 5% support the CCP. Hanover. The joint declaration is completely against the will of the people, and I must stress that this is vital. Okay. And after that, I will going to talk about the point of the crashing of the different groups of British Chinese over here. During the weekend, I don't know whether you noticed that there was a protest about in Hong Kong. Excuse me, not in Hong Kong, in the I believe it's Chinatown over in London. And there are some other ethnic Chinese, I don't know where they come from, apparently from the PRC, to come to protest against that because they believe that this is against the this is wrong to say against the Chinese itself, but this is the thing. Some of the people were saying that because the British Chinese and because you are Chinese, so you have to belong to the Chinese state. But the question that I'm posing here is, first of all, because the British Chinese in Hong Kong, they're different. They're educated and going, not educated, I correct myself, they go through the British system, not necessarily educated. I must stress it very clear about that.
Yeah.
That differentiate between it. First thing. Secondly, because the lucky escape from the 1949-1979 system, what happened was that we have seen different things. And those people who aren't, who have a different perspective, even though those people who are, or what we'll later talk about, we call it some of the people who have what I call it pan-Chinese vipers. Basically, they believe in the greater Chinese state. They would believe in the handover is good. That will crash this together, okay? I mean, for example, people like Sito Hua in Hong Kong and Martin Lee, the so-called democracy father of Hong Kong. They are the same group of people. They believing in the so-called pan-Chinese vipers. They have the pan-Chinese vipers. The pan-Chinese circle. They believing that the handover is good, only they have a democratic election, which I find it disgusting because this is against the will of the people. They're trying to entertain their own self-ego, if I be quite honest, because all these people trying to take the British out and to take power themselves, which I find particularly disgusting. Yes, my voice is raising because my blood boil every time people like Xi Hua and Martin Lee who dare to claim themselves as the democratic front runner of Hong Kong, but they're against the will of the people, and I will condemn them. So Henry Kissinger, until I can no longer be able to condemn them. Yes, it is very brutal, but I will make sure I will do it because I believe they rightly deserve to be even condemned after their death.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the point. The different group of ethnic Chinese will create a lot of problems. For example, like if you are from the Southern East Asia or the ethnic Chinese, then you might have a different perspective to see what these things are. Some of them will say that, look, this is just because you have to loyal to your own country or own people, then of course you're not going to loyal to the Chinese state. But some of them will say that, once again, say the pan-Chinese virus coming to head to say that whatever the Chinese state do must be good. That's why I said that you have different clash of them, even though it's ethnic Chinese. But the British Chinese in Hong Kong, different groups of Chinese, we were going to see a huge this crash together. It somehow remind me in the early 20th century, the so-called Bantu Hakka clan crash in Hong Kong. Now, Bantu means actually Bantu is Buntu or is a Buntu or Hakka. Buntu is Cantonese. It means in Bun is mean here local. To is in land. That's a localist. Hakka. It's a Chinese group. It's just like a gypsy of the Chinese. Okay. So basically, they are the group of people. Hak is mean guest. Ga is mean home. That means you are guest. You keep moving around. Okay. Because you have a fight of the resources over in Hong Kong, you have the different groups because you have a different sense of belongings. You know where I understand come from. That's why when you have problems, you have fight. In fact, the Buntu and Hakka clan fight is, funny enough, is well documented by the foreigners, by the Westerners. You know, the current issue that we're seeing here is funny enough that we have read this history from Westerners. So this is a thing. And we will probably see this happen. For example, like recently, a few months ago, the British government set up a committee to try to help the British Chinese from Hong Kong, you know, to have like understand the whole society when they haven't adapted in the UK, right? You guess what? They appointed a committee member that just supported the national security law in Hong Kong. Can you believe that?
See, this is the thing. I mean,
these the background check. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you go ahead.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, these. I mean, like I'm saying, it's a case that those here have obviously got a very, very different experience, and it, as you're basically alluding to, basically they're tourists. Basically, they're not really. They don't have the same perception as someone like yourself, born and raised there, and had a very different experience from those here in particular as such. I was just going to add in a quick comment because what was mentioned above here was by Voight. She says, I've heard it said that Britain gave Hong Kong to the CCP because Britain knew that if they didn't, the CCP would take it anyway, and Britain would not be powerful enough to defend it from them. That could potentially be true. It's like I said, I mean, it's always a case that, you know, such things could create war and whatnot. I completely...
I could jump into here, perhaps. I could jump into this question. Now, first of all, we have to understand a few things. If we can defend West Berlin, then we can defend Hong Kong. West Berlin situation is much worse than Hong Kong. I believe it's perfectly reasonable for me to make such a comparison. The key question here is, we, the British government, does not appeal to the help of NATO, or to be specific, Americans. You know, if we have the NATO might behind Hong Kong, you know, Hong Kong is absolutely defendable. I mean, if we can, it's very simple. If we the NATO can defend West Berlin, a much more difficult situation task. I mean, we know West Berlin it is, okay? Basically surrounded by all the East Germany, okay? Then we can do it in so doing Hong Kong. The situation is not getting worse. Next, we also want to highlight one thing. The reason is that the Americans refuse to back us here. Or to be specific, The problem is that Henry Kissinger was trying to lure the PRC to against the Soviet Union together with America. That's the biggest problem. Because in his perspective, he forcefully believed that in order to bring the Soviet Union down, then we can have a world peace. But it's nonsense. The logic is very simple. Excuse me. Both the Soviet Union and the PRC are communist or collectivist country. Why you trust one and do not trust another one? Simple, right, isn't it? It is a very basic question. But Kissinger and his gangs fail to consider this. Not to mention about that he fails to consider the implication of letting the PRC to go up. So that is my response. The biggest problem is that NATO doesn't back us. And of course, we have to say one very important thing also. Let's for the sake of argument, if the British government failed to do everything, okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
They should have followed the precedent established by, just like for Portugal, grant all the British, Portugal Chinese in Macau, through Portugal citizenship. Why they do not do the same thing in Hong Kong?
I agree. That it's one of these things that I never agree with, as you say, with government and its actions. You always find that government's interest also is more often than not different, and I suppose when it comes down to people as well, people have obviously got their own varying views or whatever. Unfortunately, there are people in this country that have been brainwashed with socialism and all sorts of that's a whole other story. I think that because we've covered quite a fair bit on that in particular, which I was wanting to actually go on and speak about because this somewhat ties in with this whole thing to do with taking back control over Hong Kong. The obstacles that would be faced with that in particular, and speaking about the chartered cities. Now, the chartered cities, and for again, because this is something that people may not be aware of, they can actually look up the Chartered City Institute. If you look up the Chartered City Institute, and this is in particular to anybody that's interested and may want to look into this themselves, I'll check the comments in a second, but essentially what it is this institute began, I think it goes further back. I think their most earliest project was actually Hong Kong. Basically what a chartered city is basically something created where it could be an empty piece of land, and people just go and they live there, and it could be an empty piece of land, even like for example within Great Britain somewhere, and the land would not be under British government rule. If that was the case, it wouldn't be under the laws of the government.
It's somehow like overseas territories.
Yeah, it would be kind of
give them defense and foreign affairs.
Yeah, it's left be. In other words, the government is limited to what it can do. It would be just a land used as such a project that would be a free market. The people would be free to go there and live there, and from that, obviously, they're free to build whatever there. They're free to run business there. They're free to trade there. It becomes separate from the rest of the UK if there was to be a chartered city. It's much like how they're actually attempting one, and I think it's getting a go-ahead or something that's in Africa somewhere, and it's just this piece of land. It's not under any government rule or nothing in terms of like the rest of the country. It would have its own self-governance. In other words, it would be a strong free market. It would be much like what you've seen of Hong Kong. Hong Kong's the prime example where, the British government, even although Britain occupied Hong Kong for such a lengthy period of time, and, obviously the British citizens there, as you were explaining before. However, Hong Kong was strongly free, where the British government didn't really rule over Hong Kong. The British government was extremely limited to what it can do in Hong Kong, and it was pretty much the hands-off sort of thing, where they just leave Hong Kong be to the free market, just leave it be. And that for me is what the solution should be in my eyes. There was even talks about several places they could do it in Britain. I remember there was the Prestwick Airport here in Scotland. Of course, Nicola Sturgeon, she, being as anti-capitalist as she is.
You say goodbye by that, Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, you know yourself, she would never allow such a thing because she's just a pro-authoritarian. However, see if you were to explain this to the people in Scotland, if you were to explain this to people, they would be excited. I think many of them would be excited by it, especially Prestwick Airport, the area there, with if the land was taken and occupied for a chartered city to be built there, where it'd be under no jurisdiction, under no UK law as such. It'd be left to self-governance, and it would be a free market. And the great thing about that particular area as well is the very fact that you have such you would have such a thriving seaport, because between Ireland and the UK, you'd see, in terms of the free trade flooding in, you would see plenty of trade coming in through that area and the port for that particular area. But there was obviously other areas in the UK that were mentioned as well. I think there was even Liverpool. There was another. There was a talk between, I think it was pretty much down nearer London, but like offshore, like the sort of area occupying between France and the UK or whatever. Like if they
Channel Islands, it could be, but it's a crown dependency. So strictly speaking,
so
it's not something that we can do. Well, because crown dependency is basically a common. It's common union, basically share the same monarch, but we are representing them internationally, but it is not part of the UK. But you go ahead.
Yeah, so it's like that for me would be the best thing to do that would solve such an issue. You already seen the ability for the UK government that enabled people from Hong Kong to come here. They gave them that opportunity, and for me that would have been the most sensible position, because people speak about, well, we've already got enough in this country, and I can understand their argument in terms of the laws of supply and demand. The free market would alleviate so much of those problems anyway, if Britain was to move towards a free market, and that's my ultimate goal anyway. There's problems with all the welfare statism, etc.
You just take. Sorry, you can see the Germany economic miracle for the 10 years of the free market. So that's my point. Okay.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Well, Germany is somewhat. It's not. You wouldn't really say it's pure free market. Nothing. It's kind of.
First 10. I mean, from 1945 to 1955 probably is, but that's it. That 10 years. I mean, of course, it's
Yeah.
not completely free, but just point really. Okay,
Yeah.
back to you.
So this is the thing. I mean, in terms of, wherever they could particularly, build a charter city. If the UK government gave it a go ahead, it would be something, it'd be something perfect, because like I've explained before, in terms of a chartered city, it would basically force the rest of Britain to give up the mixed economy, because a mixed economy would never be able to compete against a free market. So in other words, because the chartered city would be a free market, and because the rest of Britain would not be able to compete with it, it would actually be that free market that would, drag the rest of the UK in that direction, towards a better economy, towards a freer economy, towards, something that would basically give the rest of Britain a showing up in terms of, healthcare, education, and all those types of things. And that for me, it would be the best solution around things, and it would help Britain, overcome getting rid of things like the NHS, which is a pile of crap. The only reason why it continues to exist, as I've mentioned before, is because it's a monopoly and there really hasn't been any competition. I mean, if you were to create a chartered city, and let's say you created a free market healthcare system, you would have...
Or just like, let's say, even though at least regulate, like a voucher system, I always talk about that.
Yes.
It is in much better shape, because NHS is a bizarre case. We have some sort of voucher system here, the GP's one, the GPs only get the money, depends on how many patients that they see. It's kind of like voucher system. Of course, I always pointed out that, the current NHS is one of the biggest discrimination policy. I mean, why Western medicine has the right to monopolize all the fundings, while other proven alternative medicines, like traditional Chinese medicine and Ibrahim medicines from India, they hardly get their money. I mean, it is a best example to prove how some group of people were trying to monopolize the resources and maintain and go ahead. And also, one quick response to your side about the charter city. I believe that the problem that why we never get a charter city is because they're afraid that these people are afraid that we drag to the free market.
Yeah. This is basically it, because this is the thing. When you look at a chartered city, right, and if you put a free market, the truth is, right, the NHS would never survive up against a free market healthcare system, because consumer demand would flood towards the free market healthcare system. It would flood towards it. Why? Why would demand flood towards it? Number one, it would be dirt cheap. Number two, they already are getting faced with the long waiting lines on the NHS, right? So you've got all these problems. You've got all these problems, and they would be looking, and they would hear a lot of positive things about the free market healthcare system, and they would jump at the opportunity for that. They would actually, many people would actually up sticks, leave wherever they are in the UK.
Just one point to jump in, and I'll get it back to you. You may recall one of the examples. You recall when we talked about the Part 1 interview, we talked about Colonial Wall City, right? You probably remember that.
Yeah, the Kowloon Wall City.
There are a lot of so-called unlicensed medical professionals.
Mm-hmm.
You can get, now, it might not be licensed with the best service, okay? I have full disclosure about it. It might not have the best practices, but they get cheaper, and they solve most of the problem out most of the time. Of course, there will be accidents, and there will be mistakes. I'm not coming to pretend that. And one accident is too much. It is true, by the way, but the question is, much more effective, much more efficient. Most of the time can be dealt with them properly. So that is what we call, is a comparison you can see. Back to you.
Correct. I mean, it's a case that there's no such thing as perfection. So this is the thing, because like you stated, like you rightly pointed out, they would fear a chartered city, because the truth is, it's a bit like if you compare Scotland and the rest of the UK and the SNP agenda. The SNP agenda is calling out for higher tax rates, and they want more socialism. But the reality is, they would never be able to compete with a country that's more conservative minded and would seek to reduce the tax rates, as it would create a capital flight, because all the businesses would, leave Scotland and would just move down south. The businesses will flock anywhere where there are lower tax rates. That's what happens.
No question about that.
And that's the very reason why it's the same principle. If you created a chartered city, it would basically kick the rest of the it would drag the rest of the UK, rightly so, kicking and screaming towards a free market economy. The only people who cling for their dear life onto a mixed economy are people who don't even understand the first thing to do with economics. Unfortunate as it is to say, there are a lot of people out there who just don't understand. They seem to think that corporatism stemmed from, a lack of government regulation, and that goes on to a whole other topic issue. However, that for me is why, in terms of the chartered cities, would be the solution to the entire problem. But this argument I'm stating is all in correlation with taking back control, because you've put down is taking back control over Hong Kong. Well, I think one of the best ways is through the chartered cities. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I do believe that charter cities is a very good idea, and I will express my idea later because charter cities could be done in many few ways. It could be done in the UK, in the British Isles, or it could be, well, let's say when we take back Hong Kong, where we can make Hong Kong a charter city itself. And obviously, the structure of thinking about Hong Kong is a very complicated one. But first of all, I guess I'm going to get charter city first, because Hong Kong is a big chapter we're going to discuss later. Charter city itself, I absolutely believe is a good idea. A lot of ways we can achieve. For example, we can define it. For the sake of argument, I'm not saying this is the case like the Isles of Wight. I think it could be one of the places, or just any random island in Scotland that we can make it more more habitable. For example, one of the few islands that we can pick it up, or the Northern Ireland, another one. I mean, in fact, Adam Smith Institute actually has a proposal back in the late 80s and early 90s to suggest that a charter city, or something similar to that, like a low-tax port, is possible to be established in Scotland and in Northern Ireland as a way to get all the people from, not necessarily all the people, but whatever the people that is in Hong Kong, the British Chinese or whatever that is, to willing to move to there. That could be absolutely possible. Yep. So I do firmly believing that this is a good case, because this would be a very good example to show how effective and efficient the free market it is. As I just said previously, the biggest problem that we will face is that why we are not able to do this kind of charter cities, because this will drag the whole UK out, to the free market. That is the problem of most of the people, because they are some people who have interest stick to maintain the corporate stuff that we're having here will want to maintain it. This is a nightmare for them, because we're going to say goodbye to subsidies and trade barriers. That is most of them, not all of them, okay? But we can fairly just say that this is not something that some of the businesses want to do, especially those who are not competitive enough or good enough. So that's what they want to make sure this will never happen. And it's a huge shame, because we know how free market have unleashed changes over in the first 10 years after the Second World War of the West Germany, and especially in Hong Kong, after 1950 to 1979, usually will be regarded as period. Or some will argue that in 1960 to 1979, depends on when you exactly wish to measure. So that is the point. And this is the whole thing. And I absolutely believe that free market charter city is the way we can bring forward to. But I don't see this is going to be having a lot in that perspective, and that is a huge shame in my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
And of course, you go ahead first.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with all of what you had stated. I mean, especially it goes back to that point, and, the fear that these people have. The people that have those fears, and I've noticed just recently, and because of these lockdowns, right, the lockdowns that happened in 2020, a lot of people have been starting to waking up. I wouldn't say they're quite wide awake yet, because a lot of people are. I'm not saying this in a bad way, and this isn't the case. There are a lot of people who are just misinformed, right? So what I mean is that people think that before the lockdowns that they were living under freedom. They aren't. In fact, dare I even say this? People think that after the Second World War, that Britain won some sort of freedom. They're not.
That was a nightmare for the first 5 years.
Yeah.
You still have rations.
Yeah, because it's not just that. It's you cannot live within a mixed economy, which is corporatism, which is economic fascism. You cannot live within a mixed economy and then say that you're a free human being for what? For basically being an economic slave to the state, because that's essentially what they are. And Ludwig von Mises warned them about this. Ludwig von Mises had stated to them, had made it very clear in plain English. Of course, people weren't even listening to him back then. He said that the middle of the road, referring to the mixed economy, is problematic, not just because of the economic problems that end up going against the people. It's unsustainable, and of course it creates the incentive for, socialists to call for more and more socialism.
Or rely on government.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you correlate all that together, and what you end up down the road is more and more dependency upon the state, more authoritarianism like you've been seeing of recent, and that's essentially what happens. It's not freedom at all. Freedom is all about personal responsibility. It's all about the freedom for people to, and I'm talking about true private ownership. I'm not talking about some private sector that's strongly regulated by the state, but I'm talking about a free market economy, and
Sure.
and that's the fine difference. It's like I've mentioned before, people who lived the experience of the free market, like people in Hong Kong who lived the experience of the free market, are not fighting to retain that, to regain that for nothing. They understand, like yourself. I mean, you understand.
We treasure them.
Yes, exactly.
That is the way that we're going to put it, shall we say?
Correct. So you fully comprehend that as such, the value of that freedom. Whereas, and this goes back to the point, the reason why people are fighting to preserve the mixed economy in this country is because they've been brainwashed. And that's me putting it nicely. They were brainwashed in countless things. They were told a pack of lies on things like the Industrial Revolution. They were told a pack of lies about, even the American Industrial Revolution. They were told a pack of lies on things like the Great Depression and all the rest of it. And they've been they've been so conditioned, so brainwashed, they think capitalism was responsible for the boom and bust cycle. If they ever got to understand the economic history and the economics, and if they ever got to understand what caused the boom and bust cycle, the mixed economy would be dead. The mixed economy, they wouldn't be seeking to preserve. The only reason why these people are seeking to preserve the mixed economy is because they're poorly educated. They think that they can place public ownership over private ownership. To do that requires ignorance of economics. It's not an opinion. It's not some, it's my biased opinion. It's a fact. It is basically a fact. It's just understanding economics for why that is. For things relative to do with the knowledge problem, the economic calculation problem, just understanding all the basic things and the importance of prices and all the rest of it. But That's the very reason why that in this country, unfortunate as it is to say, you've got those people who think it's about preserving the mixed economy. They believe that because they were conditioned to believe, child exploitation during the Industrial Revolution, which we know was a load of nonsense. Or the nonsense.
This actually happened before Industrial Revolution, by the way. And this is the biggest mistake that we talk about. And the child use of labor, first of all, is always parental consent. Next, it's about when I say parental consent, I mean the parents will let them kids to take a job. That is a parental consent. And next, this has always happened before the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is people just simply someone is so convenient forget that.
Yeah, I mean it's just one of these things that there's so much in that period of history, and that's kind of the reason why they've gone down that road of believing the things that they do, and that's the very reason why they would fear the idea of a chartered city, because the truth is, see if you just created a chartered city and didn't mention anything about a free market and just left it be, didn't give it any label, just left it be and pretended that it was just something there as a city, right? And you brought in all this stuff like free market healthcare, etc., and you didn't give it the label of free market healthcare. The very people who criticise the free market would flood there, and they would use it, and they would, bum off about how great it is, right? That's what they would do. They would bum off about how great it is. They would get to experience it, and they would say, here's what we could have. They wouldn't understand, because you remove the label of free market, right? Because you remove that label. Sure. They would take to that and they would say, look how great this is. But the moment you actually, label something, it's free market and all the rest of this, their mind does loop the loops and they start rejecting. You get that, you get the point where I'm coming from.
Understand. Yeah.
It's because these people were born into, things like the social security. They were born into things like the welfare state. They were born into things like the NHS, and because they don't know an alternative, they think that's just the done thing, and they base the false assumptions. So that's basically the argument on the chartered cities, and I think that's obviously in my perspective is probably the best solution, as I say. But in terms of because there's the next point, which was the rise and fall of because this correlates, I suppose, the rise and fall of the Chicago School in Hong Kong and the effects on market intervention, the MPF, and the minimum wage. I mean, yourself, having lived there, what do you say on how things went there?
Well, first of all, I believe just brief point. I believe you sum up the case of Charters beautifully. I do not have any words that I can get on more about that. And also speaking about actually previously I missed a point that I said that I promise you come back to miss it out. It's about the when the obstacles of the British government when they try and take over back to Hong Kong. I mean, this is something that we just missed. Now, but we were going to, we will definitely revisit we'll get integrated in the rise and fall of Chicago, so Hong Kong first, but we'll just get to the obstacles first. Now, first of all, as you can see that I'm trying to get my screen done. As you probably see, there is a screen on the, now. This is the map of Hong Kong. Now, if the British government have to take back Hong Kong, this is there. You can see the black dotted lines here.
I think you're because I don't know if it's shown on the screen here. I know
is that on?
It only shows up on my own screen in terms of the.
I do not know. I'm trying to wait for the live stream.
Yeah, because it goes we Skype. I think that's what it is.
Yes, but can you yourself see that? Because I just want to make sure the audience can see that, because there's the whole point of trying the whole thing out. But can you see that though? It's a bit strange because
Yeah, so it's cause on Skype when you screen share, it shows up on the Skype, whereas I'm using something called Ecamm Live. So Ecamm Live, if I was to screen share, it would perhaps show, but yeah, I do. I think can you see the desktop? Hang on. I don't know why it's coming up. It's asked me to install Audio. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly fine.
Yeah.
If it is not working, then we will just I will just use my description to describe the map. Okay, that's fine. Okay. If it's not working, that's perfectly fine. Oops, that's really strange. I see something else.
Yeah.
Oops. I see something else.
I was kind of wondering there.
Perhaps I can send you my link to you. Then you can show it up the screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'll just send the link to you on Skype. Okay. And you can download it. Can you see that? Okay.
Where's the 2 seconds?
On Skype.
Did you see on Skype?
Yep.
Let's see. How do you access the? I do apologise, guys. It's
Yes, this is a first. We're trying to use a screen sharing technology, but it takes some time to try to get it done.
Yeah, I'll just go to. It's cause this thing in front of me. It's blocking the road. You say messages under chat. There. Right.
Okay. Can you see that now?
What I'll do is I'll put the image onto the desktop.
Okay, and you. Yep.
Right. Give us 2 seconds, and what I'll do is in Ecamm Live, I'll insert the image. That should be on the desktop. Open. Is that it? Can you see? You guys can see.
Because I'm waiting. I'm actually monitoring the YouTube live stream at the moment, and it doesn't pop up yet. So perhaps we have to wait a few seconds.
Yeah, it's what it is it's on my screen, and it's popped up at
Okay, yes, it is ready now. Yes, it's on now. Yes. What happens is, as you can see from the screen, there is a Hong Kong boundary map, as you can see. Oops. Yes, you just cover my face, not a problem. Not a problem. You know why cover your face. And that is the situation. What happened was that you can see this is a pre-1997 boundary. Now you can see the black dotted lines. Have you take a look to the northern boundary? You can see that actually the Hong Kong boundaries include the Hau Hoi Wan. That is the north west corner of Hong Kong. You can see that.
Yeah.
The dotted lines they include the bay, and so to the north east corner. You can see that the whole Myers Bay is included. Now you may say, what is going on then? Unfortunately, after the handover, first of all, the physical boundaries changed. They have been confined, and these boundaries will be defined again. So in other words, if the British government has ever take back, the first thing is they need to decide which boundaries they're going to take. Because if they take back the old boundaries, some of the lines have been reclaimed by now. So that is a hugely problematic thing. Because what are you going to do then? Are you going to say that the old boundaries still in effect, but those claim that land has been reclaimed, that will belong to the new British Hong Kong? Or are you going to say that these will just based on the boundaries, that is whatever the new shoreline is, or no, we just use the current boundary, that's it. So that is the first physical problem that we're facing. One, okay, this map is finished, so this is the whole point really. I was trying to hope that screen sharing will be flipped up, but this is done. Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, I didn't. Well, next time I'll probably get myself prepared. Next is that we will face a huge demographical situation here, because last time at the end of the broadcast I talked about the problem that there are 115 people come from the PRC not approved by the Hong Kong government coming in to Hong Kong every day, and they're basically pro-PRC as you can expect it. So the problem is that there is a huge amount of population is pro-PRC. If British government now take back Hong Kong, they will have a huge view that we're going to disagree with them.
Mm-hmm.
This could be proven very problematic. You understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
This is a hugely problematic thing, and this is with the second obstacle. We haven't even go down to the issues. For example, there are many former, talk about former British officials, British Hong Kong officials. That is all. Some of them actually is British officials really. They have working in Hong Kong, and after that they decided to follow the Hong Kong government rather than follow the British government to retreat. How will we handle this people then? For example, like Carrie Lam, the current chief executive of Hong Kong, were originally one of the AOs, the administrative officers that's recruited by the British government.
Yeah.
What are you going to do then? Are we going to purge them all? But if you could purge them all, who is going to fill this vacuum? You understand why I'm asking from?
Mm-hmm.
So the last, not mention about that, how would you define this, who the people should be leave the job if they do decide to purge these people, you know? The last one to do is have a huge, massive McCarthyism and then go horribly wrong. And we haven't talked about all these kind of things like how to run it, how to fill this vacuum. I mean, yes, of course, we are pro-free market, but you have some basic like administrative stuff to going on. You understand where I come from?
Yeah, the administrative stuff. I mean, it's in terms of, because this is the thing. I mean, you mentioned about. I can't really think of your name. Is it? Did you just say is it Lam?
Yes, Carrie Lam, the
Aye.
current chief executive of Hong Kong. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that she's someone who obviously she isn't exactly someone you would trust as supporting the free market as such. I know you had mentioned before as she's someone who can be influenced. I don't know if by
not her, but we'll talk about individually one by one. But she's I understand. Yes, of course, she can be influenced for sure by the CCP.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm meaning.
Because her boss is CCP, not others. I mean, let's face it. I mean, that's the whole thing. You understand where I come from?
Yeah.
So, how are we going to do it then? Because now, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but if the British government have ever tried to retake Hong Kong, this would be a huge, daunting task. And I would love to see that happen through disclosure, but we should never underestimate the difficulties. That's my point.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I just got obviously a comment there on the question, and Aaron had asked it, and obviously we will get around to answering a number of these questions and that. Because I said I would leave that to last in particular. We'll quickly go through some questions on that. So I will get around to that in particular, Aaron. That isn't a problem at all. I'm just quickly checking, because obviously I'm keeping an eye on in time in particular as well with regards to the feed. The other thing.
I will quickly. You go ahead first.
The other thing, just to mention, was something in relation with what do you say to people on the whole thing? Because this relates to the free market thing. Because obviously you know yourself the damage that's been created over so many years of the intervention from the state. How, in your perception, what's it done in the Hong Kong economy since 1997 with the government intervention?
Well, now first of all, basically we talk about how all this free market invention has been going downhill. I mean, well, first of all, we talk about the MPFs. I mean, the MPF is basically just a system that they manipulate all the people have to both employees and employers to have to pay part of their salaries into a pension fund, private pension funds. It is a disaster. I mean, it's very simple because they have a huge amount of fund. The administrative fees for the fund managers. The biggest winner is basically fund managers, really. It's very simple because the policy was designed to do that is that the customers of the decision makers are the businesses itself. Because why? If you assign an MPF, you're forced to sign one, okay? What happened is that you're following your company's plan. Okay, of course you can decide which type of risk appetite that you can go. But the question is that means that the fund managers doesn't have to have anything so many customers. All they have to do is entertain your employers, but not the employees. So that now they can charge a huge amount of management fees. There was an article I originally trying to share it, but because of the difficulties in sharing stuff, so I'm not going to ask you to share it again. Was about a guy called David Webb. Okay, Whiskey Echo Bravo Bravo Webb. Okay, the same as the very well-known Julia from America, David Webb, luxury Julia. He has an article called "Scrap the MPF." He basically pointed out the brief analyzes the case. He said that let's comparing MPF, assuming that the MPFs, if we're factoring in the management fees, and comparing with for ETF, that is exchange tradable funds, they track the index. And with the index, is that when they say index, I mean Hong Kong Hang Seng Index. It's just like the FTSE 500 and S&P 500 index. Okay, simple. Okay, if you are having a 1.5% of the administrative fees for the next, let's say 40 years or 1%. For 40 years, you can extract a third of your return. This is ridiculous, isn't it? Comparing with only 0.15%, this is usually the amount of the ETFs they charge. With the 40 years, only will extract for less than 6% of your return with the same period of time. That's why it serves the whole object of all this MPF is to basically benefit the fund managers. This is where I come from. Because the competition is low because you have to deal with the employers more than the employees. And not to mention about that because all the people have to be paying that, the lowest pay will they receive less amount of money in their pocket.
Yeah.
In other words, this is the poorest worse off. So that is exactly the point.
The other thing to mention.
And I want to point out,
yeah,
go ahead first.
The other thing to mention was the fact that I had brought it up before. And it's the thing where, Hong Kong was strongly free from, for a period right up. And during that period of the government intervention, you would eventually see, I think it was about 2010, with the minimum wage. What effect did that minimum wage have?
Oh, very huge. I mean, especially if you have been in Hong Kong before the minimum wage and after the minimum wage and you fly in, you can see a huge difference. In the past, before the minimum wage, your baggage will arrive at the baggage collection point before you clear the customs and border agents. Now, not only you can only be done after, you have to wait up to an hour to do so.
Yeah.
You may say, what is this the result of minimum wage, right? Because the baggage handlers' income is not in the past. They said that they basically say, look, we cannot afford to pay you so much, but we'll give you transportation, we'll give you free meals, Of course, you have the usual medical packages, because let's say baggage carrier is a hard, tough labor. I mean, so if you have no medical baggage allowances, I'm sorry, there's no way that you're going to get someone in. Let's face it, isn't it? Now, after the minimum wage, they said that because they squeeze up the monetary value of the wage, right? So they say, look, we're going to cut these welfare packages. No free meals, hardly any transportations. What happened? People flee. Remember, Hong Kong Airport is built on a rural area that required a highway access, okay? So it's not cheap for you to commute. Of course, there is a satellite town called Zhongzhou just next to the airport, but the whole object is that you cannot you cannot expect all the people living in the same bloody town. I'm sorry to say that. There will always some outside labor coming in. That's why you're struggling to find baggage handlers,
Yeah,
that is the effect of minimum wage, and yes.
Yeah, it's always the case with the minimum wage and you'll always hear the argument, and just to clarify, with the minimum wage, you're always going to get the higher unemployment. You're always going to see the rise in costs of goods and services. Inflation ends up driving up to pay for it. And the inflation ends up continuously wiping out the minimum wage, and working hours end up getting reduced and stuff like that. I would imagine this had an effect, and this probably coincides with the fact that you've seen a rise in oligopolies and whatnot in Hong Kong since the government intervention. Would I be right in saying that?
Oh, of course. I mean, I always remind our friends that the only reason that why in 1980s the government have more intervention is they deliberately forced the oligopoly culture. Because it's very simple. If you notice that one of the Hong Kong business tycoon Lee Ka-shing Lee, should we say, this guy basically, if you pay attention to it, all of his major rivalries are British businesses. I mean, his conglomerate, is now basically major competitors. It's Jardine Matheson, British or Scottish, because you are Scotsman, so I say that to be clear. Jardine Matheson, two Scotsmen, and founded by them. And then you have also Swire from the Scots, from the Liverpool side, Merseyside. I hope my friend from Liverpool is there. To say hello to him if he is here. A great Liverpool man, and founded a great business over in Hong Kong, the Swire Pacific. And obviously, they have to keep the oligopoly. For example, electricity. The largest electricity is a bit strange in Hong Kong because they have been defined by areas. For example, like the CLP Power, they are serving the new territories like Kowloon Peninsula. But the Hong Kong Electric is serving in Hong Kong Island and the Lemma Islands only. The Hong Kong Electric owned by Ka-shing Lee, and the CLP Power is actually controlled by the Kaduri family, a Jewish family, okay, but they are, again, British interests, okay. And the major developers do the same thing. Because by fostering this oligopoly culture, by ensuring the British Hong Kong Chinese can earn money, that can guarantee the British interest can be sustained forever, if they can stay survive, which is not the case we're seeing right now. Just to say one more fun fact, I don't know whether you know that actually HSBC is founded by a Scotsman also, in case you don't know. Yes, but not a Glasgowian though. It's Aberdeen.
Alright. Here we call it. We're called Glaswegians.
Glaswegians. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so it's Aberdonians, or they've got that label. But yeah, I mean, I can understand where you're coming from. I mean, it's unfortunately that all relates to the sort of rise and fall with the sort of, you would say the classical liberalism, unfortunately, because of all the state intervention. It's the very reason why it's created all those very problems, and obviously the you go back on that with the minimum wage, and likewise, I mean, it would have created so many problems since the introduction of it, and you saw the wages continuously improve in Hong Kong since 1948. I mean, the real wage earning growth rate you could see had dramatically improved over many of the decades, rendering the minimum wage completely pointless. It created the very problems with the cost of living, such as the housing and whatnot, is basically being a problem created by government. But yeah, I mean, in terms of that in particular, it's been pretty evident. So I'm just going to quickly check the 2 seconds.
It seems Face will have some comments too. Shall we read some of them out?
Yeah, because we've covered quite a fair bit anyway. So we'll just, because we've covered quite a fair bit on everything. I'm just going to move straight on to the questions and answers.
Sure.
So basically, that obviously Aaron had asked the question. He says, "Hey guys, great stream. What are your takes on Chinese culture's impact on their politics?" He says, "I think there will always be a strong desire for collectivist policies, but can you see people supporting more?" Well, in my personal opinion, you wouldn't really be able to say that as such with regards to people who were born in Hong Kong. I mean, the very reason why you did see the Umbrella Revolution, the very reason why you've been seeing the protests, and, you know, Mike here will be able to tell you himself, you know, the very reason that you've seen that backlash is because people in Hong Kong, like I've said, they understand the value of liberty. They experience the free market, whereas people who weren't really born into that, I suppose it really depends, because then you do see over many years, and Mike actually pointed this out himself, the very fact that many of the people in China, were actually escaping over the border for Hong Kong, and that's because they knew life was better. They knew life was, you know, they had far greater opportunity. This was like before 97 and stuff like that, and even to this very date, but they were trying to escape China for the sake of life in Hong Kong at the time. And that hasn't, you know, been there for nothing. It shows that there is a desire there for people for the free market. I just think it's a case that government's got its own interests. The Chinese Communist Party has its own interests, which is very different from the people itself. In fact, you know, if I think the only reason why you don't really hear much from the Chinese people as such, it's not all of them, but, you know, many of the people in China, it's because they're too scared to speak out. You know, well, what do you expect? I mean, they would be silenced. There has been desperate cries of help and stuff like that, and I do believe that there are many people, and I remember there was even certain books relative to the free market, you know, from economists, that were being rewritten in China, and there's been a demand for that type of material, which shows there is a desire for liberty there. But like I say, I just believe it's down to the government having its own interests and desires to uphold its power, and like Mike just explained earlier on, it seems Xi has a lack of there's division, a lack of respect.
He's struggling to keep the party towards his direction.
Yeah.
I suppose this is the way they would put that in, shall we say.
Yeah, so and from my perspective, I think it's a bit more complex. What do you have to say on that, Mike?
I I just want to check whether Aaron has finished his comment because he says supporting more ... My gut feeling tells me that the comment is not finished. Can you double check that?
Let me just check to see if there's any other comment that was mentioned.
Because it might be due to word limit, so Aaron's cannot finish his comment.
He says devolved policies like the Sino-British Joint Declaration and Xinjiang's status. However, I doubt the CCP would ever cater to this unless they're in a dire state.
Okay, this is a big Q. I mean, well, I'm trying my best to not overtime because we already overrun. But I understand. Aaron has raised a very good point. Now, first of all, I want to echo the thoughts of Scotty. When there is a compare and contrast, when people are suffering from huge daily lives, I mean, it's very simple. You cannot talk about most of the ordinary people. It's very difficult for them to have a philosophical impact for themselves to understand. But when they impact in the real life, got changed. Okay, this is a fact. Okay, not people understand. Not other people understand abstract concepts. Okay, but when you see the impact, free market, when they move on, and you can definitely feel that. So that is the point. Okay. Now, actually, Aaron's raised a very good question. Because traditionally, the so-called the 9 school and 10 thoughts, it is one of them are quite a collectivist idea. For example, the legalism. Now, I will not go a very deep dive of it because it's a guarantee to be further, overrun. By the way, we all know that. And at the same time, but in a very brief terms, legalism is a kind of a socialism or collectivism. Okay. The problem is that because Confucianism itself is not a collectivism, it's about ideologies of how to handle people and relationships in the modern terms. Okay. And the Taoism is basically, it's kind of like a free marketeer, but with a very light touch of environmentalism, because you believe in natural, so everything should be done naturally. But anyway, because the problem is that the traditional Chinese government, when they run the world, they usually always say that the parallel between the legalism and the Confucianism, they use sometimes they would say that using the Confucianism as a shell and using legalism as a soul, that actually have a tendency of collectivism. Now, this is a brief answer. The whole question to answer the cultural impact itself can already answer 20 minutes before half an hour stream of our time, which I'm not going to tell it now. I'm more than happy to do it in the next stream, okay? Because this is a very, very good topic. We're talking about different thoughts of ideas of China, exactly the spring and autumn era. I mean, that is very important. It's just like the it's not Renaissance, because Renaissance means that you revive, right? It is like the great Greek and Roman thought idea during the period of time, and it's a fascinating time. We can talk about it, and I believe in the. I praise Aaron and asked a fantastically good question on this. This is absolutely hitting some key points. I do believe there's a cultural impact on that to change the philosophical ideas of the politicians. But when people can see the contrast of daily life, it's very simple, as you and I just talked about that. Yep. You take a look at Hong Kong, see simple how people by the feet, they come to Hong Kong because the philosophical impact of their political leaders have delivered the different result of the daily lives. And that is the point that we should be talking about, because the daily lives have been affected by different philosophical ideas, and as a result, that people would go to somewhere else. But that doesn't mean that the politicians is not all influenced by the traditional Chinese culture, that it somehow influenced their political decisions and policies. So it is a fantastically fascinating question. I'm sorry that I cannot answer that for the next half an hour because it will be ridiculously overrun. So for that reason, we will definitely come back to revisit this question, and I can promise that, okay? Not a politician promises, it's a real promise, okay? Not someone that on the manifesto. Anyway, the next point about the desire. You have something to add yet? You go ahead first.
So yeah, I mean it's one of these things that obviously it's a topic issue it's got a lot of depth. That obviously there's a lot that I wouldn't even know, especially regarding the cultural, stuff and everything like that.
This will be like a historical lessons on that, and I can assure you that. I just hope that our audience not being bored to that, okay? That is the whole thing, because it is we're talking about like 300 years and 5,000 years, 300 years of quick history of a summary, and 5,000 years of 5,000, 3,000 years of a philosophical history deep dive in a crash course. It's not easy. I also think about how to summarize it, but this is a fantastic question, a very, very key question, a good question. No question about it. This is a question. I love it to get it deep. And about the devolution of the areas, I understand that because traditionally PRC is supposed to have some so-called devolution areas. Before, for example, you have Tibet, you have Xinjiang. Of course, the Tibet, you famously known the 13-point treaty or 13-point agreement. First, they went to basic law, but the problem is that they were signed in 1950 or 1951. They've been teared up in 1959 after the so-called Tibet crisis. Okay, but it has been basically cracked down. Really, it's just I personally do not see that will have a kind of like a devolution, because the problem is that traditionally the Chinese culture was never about devolution. It's always a unity state. I do not see that as a I'm not even talking about a separate state, okay? We're talking about a federalized country. It's already a very big ask in my perspective. So it will be extremely difficult. I mean, even though for the sake of argument, if there is a new country coming up, I doubt they will have any significant devolution in my perspective. It will be a unity state if they exist. They might be less if they cannot claim on. They will just like other cases go independent, but they will not go like a devolution or like a federalized country. No, I don't see that.
Yeah,
that is my point.
So the next, because I had a question on by Mark, and he says, "Hey, what are some good books to learn about the Industrial Revolution?" For me, I mean, it's a mixture of information you can take from. I didn't really take from a number of the information I took from. There's audio. Look up Robert Laffefair. I would need to actually, note down somewhere in the description area at some point when it's done. Robert Laffefair, Lefevre, Robert Laffefair. He did an audio piece, and it's on the Mises Institute, and it's in 4 parts. The Industrial Revolution, 4 parts. I should actually upload all 4 parts in like a video or something like that, so you can have an actual listen to it. I should actually start doing that, because it's good material. And he explains on the Industrial Revolution, and it's a very, very good piece to listen to. That's a start. Another place to look to is an economist who sadly passed away in, December 2016, Ralph Raico. And Ralph Raico touches upon a lot of good information regarding the Industrial Revolution. Look him up, and you'll find good information on the Industrial Revolution time period. Especially, he covers a bit of both between the British and the American Industrial Revolution. He was a very smart guy. He covered quite a fair bit. I don't know if he has any particular actual written books on it. He might have had in particular. That's something you could look into. So I kind of I took information from different, bits, whether it was video, audio, art, specific, I don't know if you would call it articles, but blog posts or whatever, on things, because the Industrial Revolution isn't just one thing. It's like you have the different topics like child exploitation, or the topic on the robber barons, and all these things. And I've pointed out so many times before, and this was actually one of the main reasons why I had got this book, How Capitalism Saved America. I could not recommend that book high enough to anybody. It's a book that you should read. And the reason being is because it covers many interesting topic issues relative to that period in history, covering the 19th century. For example, although it starts off with what is capitalism, etc., and the anti-capitalism, even within the anti-capitalism chapter, he does mention, in the 19th century, and how the socialists actually supported corporatism. The very people who proclaimed to be anti-corporatist were the ones supporting corporatist, things like the mercantilism, shall I say. But he goes on in the different chapters, for example, just to quickly list through how capitalism saved the pilgrims, so it gets you to understand that. However, in terms of the 19th century, the capitalist revolt, the highways of capitalism, which explains about the roads, etc. So it'll help you understand that of the 19th century in American history. How capitalism enriched the working class, again that covers much of the 19th century. The truth about the robber barons. And Thomas J. De Lorenzo gives, a lot of other sources, and he cites other sources that you can turn to. I think he's named Robert Filson, or I'll probably note down, and provide, the names so you can pick up, because when it comes to the robber barons, Robert Filson, I'm pretty sure his name is, I might have got it wrong. He was someone who touched upon in depth on the period of the myth of the robber barons, and it's where a lot of got their information from. So it's like I said, it's one of these things that in the Industrial Revolution is such an in-depth topic that it branches off into so many different things. You understand that something like this would really only cover at least a basic understanding of it, especially from an American perspective, and it covers on the antitrust myths and stuff like that. That's a very, very good start, a foundational start for understanding on that in particular. But in terms of other material, like I say, there's so many blog posts and everything. There's much else. Even Tom Woods, who I'm influenced by, Tom Woods touches upon, the Industrial Revolution, because his book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, he covers stuff like that. And even on his book 33 Questions, because again you'll hear all these usual myths, and that's basically that on the Industrial Revolution. I don't know if there's, I'm just checking. So, Thomas asked the question, are you concerned about China's influence in Africa? Does Britain need to make moves and gaining influence of some kind in third world countries?
I can answer the question while you are checking your stuff or your citations, if you don't mind. I suppose the question is to us.
Yeah, it was that was the question. He just says, are you concerned about China's influence in Africa?
Yes, no. Forget the expression. Now, what happened was that, of course, it's concerning that the PR is running a new imperialism move in Africa. There's no question about that. But the truth is that how far they can go. Now, yes, of course, they try to go for their one belt one road policy, but now I always say that the one belt one road policy is the best way for corruption. Not necessarily the corruption for the local officials, but the corruption for the CCP officials as well. Bear in mind that the best way to get their corruption money is from, is to try to boost the budget and then to claim, oh, I'm sorry, they have over budget. You know, they said, oh, I claim I spent 10 billion on. I'm sorry, but the project actually worth 20 billion. So we have over budget, so we blew the budget. So in fact, but how many actually is money spending off? So part of that go to their own official pocket from CCP and the local officials. That's why you see that all these one well-run policy regimes are absolutely, you know, miserable. You go and take a look how the Venezuela build hardly anything, you know, on this kind of projects. You know, apparently spend the billions, but you have a big question mark. You have billions. You know, you understand where I come from. Why they're so small?
Yeah, their economy. This is the thing, because, I mean, in terms of people who make China out as if it's some economic threat, for what? You wouldn't even need to do anything to compete with China, because, put it this way, if a mixed economy is not sustainable in the long term, and it isn't, I mean, there's no such thing as a mixed economy that's sustainable in the long term, which is why I laugh at people who say that Scandinavian countries are somehow these booming, successful economies. No, they're not. They're not. And the reason why they're not is because look at their domestic costs of living. Do you think it's high for nothing? Well, no, of course not. It's expensive because of the fact that they've got a severe lack of productivity in their domestic economies.
Just to have one interjection over here. Sorry to interrupt. The Prime Minister, Ke Changli, the current Prime Minister, just a few months last year said that there are more than 600 million of people in the PRC. Okay, that is making less than $2,000. Okay, sorry, 2,000 renminbi. That is around like 110 or 112 pounds, something like that. Okay, so you can see that, you know, this is a poor country, and you understand where I come from.
Yeah, it's not sustainable in the long term, and it's only going to get worse. Your thing, I don't know why your things, your audio kind of went. I don't know why.
Hello, can you listen to me now? Hello. Well, I do not know what is going on, but which part I have said that you cannot hear. Perhaps I'll say that again. What happened was that a few years ago, the Prime Minister, current Prime Minister Ke Changli, okay, he basically saying that let me double check numbers. Yes, basically there are 600 million of people having less than 1,200 renminbi per month. Okay, that's a very small amount of money. Okay, we talk about less than like 100 pounds or something like that per month. So that is a very, very poor country, you know. So the situation is quite much worse than most of the people think of. So that's why I highlighted that, you know. It is not as well as most people think of. It is quite a poor country. And of course, she has the audacity to claim that the PRC has eliminated poverty, which is insane.
Yeah, it's one of these things that we've mentioned before, that it's really this ticking time bomb where it's based on debt. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, spending recklessly. It's like those people who try to make out as if Britain and the United States are rich countries. We're not rich. We aren't rich. You can't spend yourself into debt and then call yourself rich at the same time. If that was the case, I could just go out and borrow money and buy a Ferrari and, you know, call myself rich because I'm driving about in a Ferrari. It does not make a country rich. Being rich, maybe in terms of material possessions, right? Maybe in terms of wealth in that regard, but in terms of, you know, finances, China is not exactly this, you know, hugely prosperous country. It's
Sure, just to correct myself, it's 117 pounds per month. That is 1,000 renminbi per month. 600 million people. That's what the Prime Minister of PRC said. So you can see that. Yes, back to you.
So yeah, I'll just ask that thing that briefly answers that. Just reading through comments, I think there was a Dr. Kevin Smith who tried to help the poor people by having more freedom in healthcare, and the service Canada joined. Yeah, that's just one of those comments. I'm just looking for any other questions. Strength is Britain in the military. Not sure that's a question. We're just briefly looking through. Sharon asks, I'm interested in how China actually opened up its economy, but it's a socialist country, so wealth would not be capable of rising all that high. Well, this is the thing. I mean, when people say opening up, yes, in a sense that, you know, for example, in 1977, when Deng Xiaoping stepped in and began the privatisation, that in a sense was, you could call it that to a certain extent, freeing up to some extent compared to like the communism before. However, it was so short-lived in the sense because the Chinese Communist Party utterly despised the thought of losing power. So they were utterly obsessed with the idea of this heavy intervention and trying to make it work. So whilst they've somewhat kept the private sector, whilst they may have kept that and created the illusion that it's capitalist, and maybe some people think it's, you know, more capitalist and whatever, right? Whilst they've created that illusion, the Chinese Communist Party has been, like I say, obsessed with trying to make heavy government intervention work. And it just doesn't. Their country's in a mess. If you were to compare the east coast of China, that's where most of the wealth went.
Yes, the onshore areas. That's what Xiaoping then said. Let part of the people get rich first. And that's famous saying. And I'm sorry to just have a very, very quick his history point out. What happened is that after the open door policy, you have a 10-year until 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown of quite a free market. A few years, and then got trying to narrow down, but Xiaoping then double down to say that you got to keep on opening the economy. Of course, now until now when Xi gained power, trying to close everything down, and this I will have to spend another half an hour, 45 minutes to have a very in-depth discussion about that. I'm sorry, it's the same good old question that we are running out of time. Just a very brief mention. Ronald Coase write a few good books. Stephen Anderson write a few good books. But you have to take a pinch of salt on Stephen Anderson because he has now protected by the PRC. Not protected in some sense because he has been accused by the taxation avoidance by the American IRS. He's an American citizen. So he fled to PRC because there's no extradition treaty between PRC and the USA. But well, if we have time, well, this will be good enough for another long stream.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to cover that, and we'll look into that, and we'll add it into our next stream at some point, because it's one of those questions that you can go into so much more depth and whatever. For this, briefly, this question that Sharon had asked, she said, I'm interested in the American healthcare system and I want to know how socialism makes it worse. Well, the answer is that you've got to remember is everything's down to a question of scale, right? So 100% capitalism is anarcho-capitalism, right? Capitalism is all about leaving the market be to the laws of supply and demand. In other words, you hear the term market value, so it doesn't matter whether it's prices, the interest rates, the ratio of money, everything's down to the market value. Because you see controls, whether it's fixing interest rates, whether it's fixing the ratio, whether it's fixing prices, that's socialism. Of course, socialists will try to deny that fact. That is socialism. Socialism involved in the economy is the controls, is the protectionism. You can see this in the contrast between capitalism and socialism when it comes to free trade versus protectionist tariffs. The socialism is all, when you're getting socialism involved in the economy, and in practice it's all to do with state direction of the economy. So where people are getting confused, people think of things in black and white and think it's just public versus private, and they look at private as if it's a black and white argument, as if all private ownership's just the same. But there's a strong difference between a private sector strongly regulated and controlled by the state to that of a private sector left be to regulate itself. And that government intervention of the private sector to give the state the power to control and direct the private sector is still socialism. Even although socialism ideologically seeks to get rid of the private sector, perhaps in Marxist theory, fascism was really just a branch. It was just a different strategy of socialism, shall I say. And socialists will try to define socialism from the perspective of, you know, a specific theory that suits their narrative, shall I say. So the point being, with regards to, just quickly on this, with regards to American healthcare, the reason why you've seen such a problem, had it been left to capitalism, you would not have seen this problem, because there's no barrier to entry into the free market, right? So in other words, competition would flood into the market. What does that mean? Well, at the end of the day, if you've got, you know, competitors flooding into the market, and let's say you've got a very profitable industry, right? After all, if an industry is very, very profitable and it's the type of career you're going to make good money out of, right, because it's expensive, that incentivizes, since there's no barrier to entry into the market, that incentivizes more and more competition to flood into the market as providers. So what ends up happening is there grows a larger and larger quantity of suppliers, and before you know it, that ends up pushing the cost down, and the cost of healthcare and everything drives down, and etc. through the free market, because there's the freedom for people to enter into the market, right? That's what happened with the oil refinery market. John Davis and Rockefeller entered in 1863. Hundreds of other companies flooded the market simply because, well, it was a very profitable industry. As a result of that, the higher level of productive output, because of a larger quantity of suppliers, resulted in oil prices plummeting. So in other words, between 1863 to 1870, the price of a barrel of oil dropped by more than 50%. And that harmed a lot of these inefficient companies. That's a whole other story. But the point I'm addressing is the fact that the free market allows such freedom into the market, but because of government intervention, in other words anti-capitalism, because of all the government intervention, it's restricted the supply and it's increased the demand. The good example of that was the American Medical Association monopoly. In 1904, they basically granted the AMA, which is a cartel created by government. That's what government creates. It leads to cartelization. But this cartel, the American Medical Association, was granted a monopoly by the federal government to close down 25 medical schools within the first 3 years. That resulted in a 50% reduction of medical students. And, you know, again, you look over the course of that century-long period, right up to the mid-1990s, there was a total of about 123 medical schools closed down. So obviously you're going to end up with a shortage of medical staff. And at the same time, the US population was booming. So you had the US population increase by 284%. Now in the laws of supply and demand, As I've stated before, a higher price in the market's a price signal to tell you there's a shortage. Well, what do you think created the shortage problem with regards to the medical doctors? The government's granted monopoly that ended up closing down all those medical schools. And when you've got a population that vastly increases, there's going to be a far greater demand for medical treatment, isn't there? So there's far, in other words, the demand far outstripped the supply available to them, and that's been a monopoly, something engineered by government. That's just a small example. The other example was the third party payer system. That was where basically the federal government had created what you call the third party payer system. The third party payer system just simply means that it's someone else other than the consumer that gets to determine the cost. So they hold a monopoly over it. So in other words, what the government has done, the government has created a monopoly of cost in the background in the hands of third parties so that the consumer cannot shop around. That is anti-capitalism. It's not capitalism, it's anti-capitalism. Capitalism is not about being anti-free market. A free market means that it's the consumer who gets to freely shop around for the cheaper cost in a private competitive market where there's a straight transaction between the consumer and the provider. And that does not exist within the main American healthcare market because of the anti-capitalism carried out by the government. The government created the third-party payer system where the government monopolised the cost in the hands of third parties in the background, and that was the very reason why the collusion between the private pharmaceutical companies, that was the very reason why the private pharmaceutical companies were able to get away with shafting the consumer by driving their prices up. In other words, the collusion was only able to form because of government's third-party payer system. A collusion cannot form in a free market because any attempt at cartelisation in a free market is destroyed because there's no barrier to entry into the market. There's nothing stopping competition flooding in. It's that simple. Cartelisation only takes place because of government and its intervention creating barriers to entry into the market. That's the very reason why. And there's other issues to do with the licensing issue that government created, the introduction of insurance for absolutely bloody well everything. In other words, government is the sole cause of why Europe, main American healthcare market, is so expensive. In other words, that is to say, anybody who blames the fact that there's the presence of a private sector don't have a clue what they're talking about. In fact, the private sector is overregulated. So, number one, there isn't true private ownership. Number two, it's got nothing to do with private ownership. It's got nothing to do with cost. Number three, it's got nothing to do with the fact that there's profits and losses. You know, just because private companies seek to make a profit, it's got absolutely nothing, absolute zilch to do with why cost is high. Because what that tells you, if anybody says, well, profits is the reason why something's expensive, you know for a fact I've never studied economics, because a higher price is a signal to say there's a shortage. In other words, it's to do with the laws of supply and demand. It's not to do with, oh, it's because it's a for-profit system. What the hell does that mean? It doesn't even make sense. Anybody who understands economics would comprehend that.
Well, actually, the so-called cost-based pricing is wrong, because the Marxists love to use it, say that because the cost of incoming is cheap or high, so the price is high, is relatively high or relatively low. This nonsense. It is depends on the market situation. So that's the point. And I am sorry to say that, Scotty, but my microphone is, you might be aware I'm using a wireless microphone, but it's running out of electricity. So it's a matter of time that I have to reluctantly call a stream off here. So I suppose we have to and here today. I'm sorry to say that.
Yeah, no, that's not a problem at all. It's obviously been good, and no doubt we'll get around to, the next stream at some point and cover specific things, obviously that hasn't been covered as such.
Sure. Well, I'm very sorry for our audience, but I'm really running out of battery. So, my is wireless. So, I'm sorry to say that I suppose it is time for us to say goodbye then.
Yep, definitely. Righty.
Okay. So, well, goodbye.
Right, talk to you later, man.
Yep, talk to you a bit. Bye-bye.
Right, bye. Where's the... So, I'll obviously just cut this thing off. I shall talk to you later, right?
Is it off now?